Welcome back, brothers, to Warhammer. Tonight's story, we're diving into theory on who and what CYPHER is planning. Before we get to the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. And I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been killing it like usual. Now, let's get to the video.
The dark cells had no sky. They existed beneath terror, as a wound exists beneath armor, hidden from the gaze of the unworthy, and sealed beneath layers of adamantium, ceramite, sanctified stone, null wards, oath-locked gates, and the cold patience of the 10,000. No pilgrim would ever kneel there. No scribe would ever record its corridors in approved cartographs. No preacher of the ecclesiarchy would raise his voice beneath those vaults, for there were things below the imperial palace that even faith was not permitted to name. The air tasted of incense, ozone, old blood, and Psyker ash. CYPHER hung in the center of the cell, bound upright by restraints that had held creatures older than human history. Adamantium clamps closed around his wrists, his ankles, his throat, his waist. Each link in the chain was etched with microscopic script, prayers of containment written by blind scribes who had bitten out their own tongues after finishing their labor. Null field emitters squatted in the corners like iron gargoyles, their machine spirits growling in frequencies that made mortal marrow ache and psychic perception curdle. Witch lamps burned without flame. Servo skulls circled in slow procession, their lens eyes clicking, their parchment purity seals fluttering in the stale breath of hidden ventilation ducts. CYPHER did not struggle. He had not struggled when the custodes took him. He had not spoken when his weapons were removed and placed beyond reach beneath stasis veils and guardian sigils. He had not bowed when they dragged him past gates, inscribed with the names of those who had died before the palace walls during the siege. He had not flinched when the cell's wards closed around him, and the silence of the dark cells pressed into his skull like a blade. His armor was ancient, dark green beneath the dust of wars that no living scribe remembered. A robe of pale cloth hung over it, torn, burned, and darkened by old travel through void-ship corridors, demon worlds, and the forgotten roads between stars. His helm was hooded. His face remained shadowed. His bolt pistol and plasma pistol rested upon a black stone plinth beyond the ward circle, each weapon shackled by suspensor locks and watched by a hovering cherub machine whose dead eyes never blinked. Beside them lay the sword. The sword was sheathed, even imprisoned, even beneath the palace, even with Oromite guardians watching him from the gloom. The blade remained hidden. It had always remained hidden. Shield Captain Asterion Valkus stood before him in silence, his guardian spear grounded with its blade angled toward the prisoners' hearts. He wore Oromite plate the color of a dying sun, its surface marked by campaign scars too fine for mortal eyes to read. Red plumes hung motionless from his helm. A cloak of heavy crimson fell from his shoulders, unmoving in the dead air. He was immense, but not brutish. There was no wasted motion in him, no mortal impatience, no theatrical anger. He was the Emperor's will shaped into flesh, gene alchemy, discipline and wrath. Around him waited 5 more custodians, each silent, each armed, each watching CYPHER as though the fallen were not a prisoner, but a door that might open onto extinction. Valkus spoke at last. "You stand within the Emperor's shadow, fallen. Lie carefully." His voice did not echo. The cell swallowed sound too quickly for that. It made every word feel like a verdict delivered inside a tomb. CYPHER raised his head. For a moment, nothing answered Valkus but the hum of null machines and the distant pulse of Terror's hidden engines. Somewhere far above them, continents of steel, marble, bone, and dust trembled beneath the weight of worship. The imperial palace sprawled across mountains and poisoned horizons, an empire of walls, guns, reliquaries, and barracks built over the grave of old Earth. Above that, void shields shimmered over the throne world. Above that, fleets burned in formation around the cradle of mankind. Above all of it, unseen and yet felt by every navigator, every astropath, every pilgrim mad enough to dream of holiness. The Astronomicon burned, or had burned. CYPHER's voice emerged softly from the hood's darkness. I did not come to Terra to escape judgment. I came because judgment is dying on its throne. One custodian shifted by less than a finger's breadth. It was the only sign that the words had struck anything living. Valkus did not move. Blasphemy is common currency among your kind. My kind, CYPHER said, were once yours. You were never mine. No, I was never so fortunate. The guardian spear lifted a little. Its power field whispered awake, blue-white light crawling along its blade. You will not veil treason in regret. CYPHER looked beyond him, past the custodian, past the walls, past the buried vaults and the kilometers of stone and gunmetal overhead. It was not sight, not truly. He had walked too many impossible roads to believe vision belonged only to eyes. Regret is for men who expected mercy. Valkus considered him for several heartbeats. CYPHER heard every one of them. The custodian's physiology was a fortress. His heart beat slowly, each pulse controlled, immense, disciplined beyond the dreams of lesser transhumans. You entered the throne world under false sanction. You carried weapons of unknown provenance into the palace. You marched in the wake of the avenging sun beneath the eyes of the Emperor himself. I walked where I was required. By whom? CYPHER's head inclined slightly. You know the answer I would give. I know the answers traitors give. Fate, necessity, oath, destiny, old sins, dead masters. Lies become more ornate with age. A faint sound came from CYPHER then, not laughter, something older and drier. You have guarded this place too long, shield captain. You think every secret wishes to harm your lord. Valkus stepped closer. The ward circle brightened. Runes crawled across the floor in warning, burning from dull silver to white fire. Every secret kept from him is harm. CYPHER's chains rattled once as he shifted his weight. The restraints tightened in answer, biting deeper. Blood welled at his wrists, dark against the green of his armor and the pale cloth of his robes. Then the Imperium has become an empire of wounds. Before Valkus could answer, the outer gate opened. It did not swing. It unsealed by layers, each one withdrawing with the solemn violence of a fortress disarming itself. Wards dimmed and reignited. Bronze locks rotated. Cherubim whispered Binharic warnings. Servo skulls dipped in their flight, as if bowing to an approaching executioner. A figure entered in black. Interrogator Chaplain Mordain Barakiel crossed the threshold, as though entering a chapel built for one purpose only, confession by torment. His armor was the deep green of the dark angels, but nearly swallowed beneath robes of bone white and black. A skull-faced helm stared from beneath his hood. Red lenses burned where eyes should have been. A Crozius Arcanum rested in one fist, its winged icon heavy with censure. At his waist hung tools no loyal warrior should need, and no penitent could survive unchanged. Behind him came two Deathwing knights, silent in Terminator plate the color of old bone. Their maces were mag-locked. Their storm shields bore scars from wars erased from chapter record. They looked at CYPHER with the stillness of tomb guardians who had finally found the corpse that belonged in their vault. Barakiel halted before Valkus and inclined his skull helm by a fraction. It was not a bow. It was acknowledgement sharpened into insult. Shield Captain. Interrogator Chaplain. This prisoner is to be surrendered to the unforgiven. No. The word fell without ornament. It struck the chamber harder than a gunshot. Barakiel's fingers tightened around the Crozius. His sins are older than your watch, custodian. They are ours to flens. Valkus turned his helm toward the chaplain. Nothing beneath the palace is yours. He is fallen. He is contained. He is infection. He is contained. Barakiel stepped closer. The Deathwing did not follow. They did not need to. Their presence filled the doorway with the promise of sanctioned violence. You do not comprehend what hangs in your chains. This creature is not merely renegade, not merely traitor. He is the wound beneath the First Legion's breastplate. He is the whisper that has poisoned 10,000 years of penance. He belongs in the rock. He belongs beneath my blade. He belongs before the inner circle, screaming the names of the damned until truth tears itself from his throat. CYPHER looked at him. "Mordain Barakiel," he said. The chaplain became very still. CYPHER continued, calm as dust settling over. "Bones. You were told my name is forbidden. You were told my capture would cleanse your chapter's shame. You were told the lion's sons can be made whole by burying the past one body at a time." Barakiel's Crozius crackled. "I was told enough." "No, you were told what would keep you hunting." The chaplain crossed the distance in 3 strides and drove the haft of his Crozius into CYPHER's abdomen. The blow would have burst a mortal man open across the floor. It would have broken a lesser transhuman. CYPHER's armor cracked. Blood pushed through the torn robe. His chains snapped taut, and the restraints howled against their anchor points. He did not cry out. Valkus angled his spear between them. "Strike the prisoner again, and you will answer for it." Barakiel's skull mask turned slowly. "To you? To the throne?" That silenced even the interrogator chaplain. For a moment the 3 of them remained locked in the ward light. The Golden Guardian, the black-robed hunter, the bound exile between them. Around them, the dark cells hummed. Above them, terror groaned. Then every astropath in the palace began to scream. The sound did not reach the cell as sound alone. It came through walls, through warding, through stone and blood, and the psychic scars of holy terror itself. 1 billion prayers shivered. Choirs ruptured in their sanctums. Men born blind saw the galaxy split open and clawed out their own eyes to escape the vision. Astropaths convulsed in iron thrones as their skulls cracked from within, spilling light, blood and grey matter across lecterns of black marble. Choir masters chanted litanies until their tongues burned. Servo-scribes recorded nonsense in loops of ink and blood. Men who had served the Adeptus Astra Telepathica for centuries died like insects beneath a god's boot. The Astronomicon faltered, not failed, not yet, faltered. Every lumen in the cell dimmed. The null field stuttered. One servo skull dropped from the air and shattered against the floor, scattering teeth and brass. The witch lamps bent inward, their pale flames bowing toward CYPHER, as though some pressure behind reality had changed direction. Valkus lifted his spear. The other custodians moved as one, forming a ring around the prisoner and the Dark Angel. There were no shouted orders. The 10,000 did not need them. Barakiel turned toward the sealed gate. "What has happened?" Valkus said nothing. His helmvox clicked, receiving transmissions too sacred and too terrible for lesser ears. CYPHER closed his eyes. Far above, Terra's sky had torn. The great rift opened across the heavens, like a wound cut into creation by a blade too vast for sanity. Warp light bled between stars. Reality screamed where the cicatrix maledictum spread its impossible scar across the galaxy. Ships in high anchor broke formation as their crews went mad. Navigators vomited blood behind third-eye veils. Orbital platforms fired into empty space, their machine spirits howling at enemies that had not yet manifested. Pilgrim continents stampeded beneath sirens and sermon horns. Hive spires shook as panic became a physical force, men crushing men by the tens of thousands in shrine avenues, paved with devotional bones. In the palace districts, statues wept blood from stone eyes. Reliquaries burst open. Candles burned black. Men in the uniform of the Astra Militarum raised laser guns toward skies they could not see and prayed through clenched teeth. Servitors continued their duties while mobs broke against them, their flesh torn from augmetic frames by panicked hands. Priests roared that the Emperor protected. Some believed it. Some needed to hear it before they died. Then the demons came, not in armies at first, in accidents, in reflections, in mouths opening too wide, in shadows cast the wrong way. A pilgrim laughed until his jaw split, and something red crawled out, wearing his face like wet parchment. A scribe's quill wrote a name in his own blood, and the name stood up from the page with talons. A military officer drew his sidearm to restore order, and shot himself through the throat when his reflection smiled before he did. Blood letters tore through veil-thin reality near the outer precincts, brass blades rising and falling, chopping men into steaming ruin. Flesh sloughed from bones in red sheets. Heads burst beneath hooves. Entrails spilled across mosaic floors dedicated to saints whose names were swallowed by screams. The palace answered with war. Defense lasers woke. Macro cannon batteries elevated. Thunderhawks screamed from launch bays. The Adeptus Custodes moved toward breach points like gold-armored wrath. The Imperial Fists and other Sons of Dawn turned barricades into fortresses within heartbeats. Skitari cohorts marched through arterial tunnels, galvanic rifles raised, Binharic hymns piercing the panic. The air filled with orders, prayers, static, and the wet percussion of human bodies becoming meat beneath the tread of their own defenders. Beneath it all, in the dark cells, CYPHER opened his eyes. "He is not failing," he whispered. "He is being devoured slowly enough for mankind to call it salvation." Barakiel turned back to him. "What did you say?" CYPHER's hood shadowed his face. "You heard me." The chaplain raised his Crozius. This time Valkus did not interpose the spear quickly enough to stop the first movement, only the second. Power fields spat against one another, gold and black, guardian blade and sacred maul locked between oath and fury. "Speak that blasphemy again," Barakiel snarled, "and I will carve your tongue from your skull before the custodian can forbid me." CYPHER looked past the weapons. "Your chapter made a sacrament of silence. Do not pretend hatred of blasphemy. You hate competition." Barakiel lunged. The dark cells lost power. It was less than a heartbeat, less than the time between a bolter's ignition and impact, less than a dying man's last attempt to inhale. Darkness swallowed the chamber whole. No lumen, no ward, no null field growl, no targeting rune, no vox, no machine spirit whisper. Even the guardian spear's power field vanished, leaving only the memory of light. In that single impossible instant, something moved. The power returned. The ward circle flared. Null fields screamed back into being. Emergency lumen strips ignited red. Custodians shifted into kill stances. Spears raised. Auramite plate catching the blood-colored light. Barakiel's Crozius thundered against empty air. The chains hung open. The manacles remained locked, but the wrists they had held were gone. Blood slicked their inner edges, fresh and dark, running down adamantium links in slow threads. The restraints had not been broken. The wards had not been breached. The door had not opened. CYPHER's pistols were gone from the plinth. The sword was gone. Barakiel stared at the empty chains. The vox grill of his skull helm emitted a sound too low to be a growl and too controlled to be a scream. Valkus turned his gaze to the floor. There, carved into the black stone within the ward circle, cut deep enough to bleed molten sparks from the wounded machinery beneath, was a single word: Caliban. Caliban did not welcome the dawn. It endured it. The pale sun rose through a roof of black branches and poison mist, finding no softness in the world below. Its light bled across forests older than mankind's dreams, over bark like iron, thorns like hooked knives, and moss that fed on warm blood when snow and rain were not enough. The trees stood close together, their limbs interlocked, as if conspiring against the fortresses of men. Beneath them moved things that had never known fear, until knights first rode beneath the banners of the Order. Even then, fear had merely learned patience. The forests of Caliban remembered everything. They remembered the first men to build walls against the dark. They remembered the first blades raised against the great beasts. They remembered screams swallowed beneath green-black canopies, and vows spoken over corpses too mangled to burn. They remembered the old shame of noble houses that had fled when they should have stood, and the brighter shame of brave men who had stood too long and died without witness. The young knights knew this. Every child brought into the order learned it before he learned the weight of steel. "The forest remembers the coward," said Brother Seraphax. His voice was low inside his helm, flattened by the rebreather grill and made solemn by the rite. Rain tapped against his armor in a soft, relentless patter. He knelt in the mud with one gauntlet pressed against the haft of his blade. Around him, 7 initiates knelt in a half circle, their cloaks soaked black, their helms bare at their knees. They were not yet full knights. They still had faces the forest could recognize. "The blade remembers the oath," answered the initiates. "The dead remember both. The dead remember both." The words rolled into the mist and were eaten there. Above them, the fortress of Alderuk rose from a jagged shelf of stone, all towers, murder holes, iron gates and pennants snapping in the wet wind. Its walls had been built to defy monsters that climbed sheer rock with talons, monsters that burrowed through the earth and burst from chapel floors, monsters that sang in the voices of fathers, brothers and sons. The fortress was not beautiful. No Calibanite fortress was beautiful. Beauty was a weakness men carved into things when they had forgotten how the dark pressed against their doors. Alderuk was honest. It was stone raised by men who expected to die behind it. The one called CYPHER watched the rite from beneath an archway of black stone. He did not stand among the young. He did not kneel among the old. He wore no crest of house pride, no plume of personal vanity, no jewel bright enough to catch the forest's attention. His armor was dark beneath his robes, and his hood hid the face that many in the order had seen, but few truly knew. A pistol rested at his side, strange to the eyes of older knights, and yet already accepted as part of the new age descending upon Caliban. A sword hung opposite it, plain in its scabbard, unadorned, unboasted, and therefore more dangerous than any ceremonial blade in the fortress. CYPHER was not his name. It was older than him, and it would outlive him if duty remained stronger than blood. There had been others before him. There would be others after, if the world did not end beneath the weight of its own secrets. In the order, names were armor for the soul, but titles were chains. The title of CYPHER was the heaviest chain of all. He kept what kings could not be trusted to remember. He guarded what commanders could not be allowed to use. He preserved words too poisonous for victory feasts, too sharp for confessional rites, too necessary to destroy. The Lord CYPHER was not merely a keeper of codes. He was the vault made flesh. He was the silence walking beside history, with one hand upon its throat. A footstep sounded behind him. CYPHER did not turn. "You watch them as though they are already dead," Luther said. "They are Calibanite," CYPHER answered. "That is never a distant possibility." Luther came to stand beside him, tall and broad, his presence warm in a way that made lesser men straighten before they understood they had done so. He wore his armor without ostentation, yet somehow made even restraint seem regal. His beard was trimmed close. His eyes were bright with intelligence and charm, and with something else beneath it, something bruised and poorly hidden. Luther could speak to men in a way that made them wish to be greater. That was his gift, and perhaps his curse. He could stand before frightened squires and make courage seem like a debt already owed. He could laugh at a feast and make old rivals forget blood feuds for a night. He could kneel beside a dying knight and make the man believe his death had been witnessed by all the ancestors of Caliban. But he had stood beside a Primarch too long. No mortal excellence survived that comparison unscarred. "Harsh words," Luther said, "even for you. Accurate words. Accuracy is a poor wine. It fills no man's cup. It has other uses." Luther smiled, but the smile did not reach deep enough. Beyond the courtyard, Brother Seraphax led the initiates in the last lines of the rite. Their voices rose beneath the rain. Steel rasped free of scabbards. Young blood was drawn across young palms and spilled into the mud for the dead to taste. They need hope, Luther said. They need discipline. They need both. CYPHER looked toward the forest. Hope teaches a man that tomorrow is owed to him. And discipline? Discipline teaches him to kill before discovering whether he is owed anything at all. Luther gave a soft laugh. You make the world smaller than it is. No, the forest does that. For a time, they watched in silence. Far below Alderuk, horns sounded from the outer watch road. Not alarm, not yet. A procession was approaching from the west, its banners hidden by rain and distance. Even before the heralds reached the lower gate, CYPHER knew who rode at its heart. The world seemed to prepare itself around that unseen presence. Men adjusted their posture. Servitors turned with insect obedience. Knights who had been laughing a moment earlier let their mirth fade into something more reverent and more afraid. The lion had returned from the northern hunts. No man needed to say it. The forest knew. Lionel Johnson came through the gate before noon, helmed in pale gold and dark plate, with the marks of battle upon him and the silence of command around him like a drawn blade. Behind him rode warriors who had already begun to cease being merely knights. Some were transformed by the Emperor's genecraft, made taller, stronger, harsher, their bodies reforged toward the shape of angels of war. Others were not yet changed and would never be. The difference hung between brothers like a sentence awaiting proclamation. The lion dismounted without ceremony. Blood clung to his gauntlets, not human blood. It steamed faintly where rain touched it, and the stones beneath his boots hissed as drops fell from his armor. A beast had died. No one asked how great it had been. Men did not ask such questions of the lion. They watched what he had returned from and measured their own courage against the absence of strain in him. Luther stepped forward first. "My lord," he said, bowing with perfect respect. The lion looked at him. Luther. One word. No warmth, no cruelty, merely acknowledgement, pure and sharp. CYPHER watched Luther receive it like a wound hidden beneath armor. The Primarch's gaze moved next to CYPHER. For an instant, the courtyard seemed to still around them. Even the rain appeared less willing to fall. "Lord CYPHER," said the lion. "My lord," CYPHER answered. The lion's eyes were pale and cold, not with malice, but with distance. To stand before him was to understand why ancient men had invented stories of spirits beneath mountains and judgment in the stars. He was not difficult to love because he was unworthy of it. He was difficult to love because love required nearness, and the lion was always far away, even when he stood within arm's reach. "We ride again before dusk," the Primarch said. "The southern marches report movement in the old wood." "Another beast?" Luther asked. "Worse." No one asked what worse meant. On Caliban, worse had many shapes. The hunting party left beneath a sky the color of wet iron. Knights rode beside warriors who would one day be called the First Legion. Horses snorted steam into the chill air, though more and more of the column marched in powered armor rather than saddle. Chainswords hung beside knightly blades. Bolt weapons rested beside lances. Old Caliban and the new Imperium rode together beneath dark banners, and even then the seams showed. Terran iterators had spoken of unity, compliance, enlightenment, destiny among the stars. They used clean words, polished words, words that sounded as if they had never been carried into a forest where men died screaming in the jaws of things that should not exist. The Calibanites had words of their own: oath, watch, hunt, shame, silence. CYPHER rode near the center of the column. Luther rode ahead beside the lion, speaking when speech was permitted and falling silent when silence was required. The Primarch rarely answered at length. He gave commands. He named routes. He assessed wind, ground, spore, threat. Luther made men feel seen. The lion made men feel measured. By twilight, the forest had swallowed them. The trees closed overhead, massive and black, their branches clawing across one another in the rain. Auspec's spirits chattered and failed. Vox beads spat static. The horses grew reluctant, and men who had hunted since childhood touched oath tokens beneath their gorgets. There was a taste in the air like rust and fever. They found the first bodies at moonrise. 3 watchmen from a logging holdfast hung upside down from the trees. Their skin had been peeled away in strips and braided through the branches. Their mouths were packed with leaves. Their eyes had been replaced with black thorns that pulsed softly, as if drinking what remained of their thoughts. One was still alive. His chest fluttered open and shut, ribs moving like fingers. Brother Seraphax raised his blade to grant mercy. The lion caught his wrist. Not yet. The dying man's lips moved. Leaves spilled from his mouth in a wet clump. Beneath them came a voice that was not his. It spoke each knight's name. Not. The names they wore. The names they feared. One initiate retched inside his gorget. Another began whispering the catechism of the blade. A legionary raised his bolter and received no order to fire. The corpse smiled without skin. The lion released Seraphax's wrist. Now! The blade fell. The head came away, and black fluid fountained from the stump, hissing where it touched mud. The trees answered with laughter. Then the beast came. It erupted from the forest with the size of a siege engine and the wrongness of a nightmare given meat. It had too many limbs, some furred, some scaled, some armored in bark-like plates crawling with human teeth. Horns crowned its skull in a twisted halo. Its face was almost leonine, almost human, almost something once noble before the warp had taken the shape and made mockery of it. Bladed tendrils lashed from its spine, each ending in a hand that opened and closed like a starving mouth. The first horse died without sound, cut into pieces so quickly its rider remained mounted for a heartbeat atop collapsing meat. Then the screaming began. Bolters roared. The sound tore through the trees like thunder made obedient. Shells punched into the creature and detonated, bursting craters through muscle, spraying black blood, bone chips and ropes of twitching innards across armor and mud. The beast did not fall. Its wounds opened wider and spoke in the voices of dead men. Brother Seraphax led the initiates in from the left, blades raised. The creature turned. A tendril punched through Seraphax's chestplate and out through his back, lifting him from the ground. His sword still fell, severing the limb that impaled him. He crashed down in a flood of blood and broken ceramite, trying to rise with a hole through him large enough to show the forest beyond. The blade remembers, he choked. An initiate finished the rite for him by driving his sword into the beast's knee joint and vanishing beneath a downward stomp that reduced him to armor fragments, pulped flesh, and a fan of bright blood across the roots. The legionaries advanced with discipline. They did not shout. Their bolters barked in controlled volleys. Chain blades came alive with snarling teeth. One warrior lost an arm and continued firing one-handed until the beast's claws closed around his helm and crushed it inward. His skull burst inside the ceramite with a wet crackle over the vox. Another drove a chainsword into the creature's belly, and the weapon clogged instantly with glistening ropes of intestine that writhed around the teeth as if trying to pull the blade deeper. Luther fought beautifully. There was no other word for it. He moved with the grace of a man born to make violence appear noble. His blade carved through tendrils. His pistol fired into the thing's eyes. He dragged a wounded knight clear by the collar and shouted for the line to hold, and men obeyed him because terror broke against his voice and found no purchase. Then the lion struck. He did not charge like a hero in a saga. He advanced like an execution already decided. His sword rose and fell, each movement exact, each blow taking something vital. A horn severed, a limb opened. A spine tendril cut away. The beast recoiled from him, and for the first time, CYPHER saw fear in something born from the forest's hatred. CYPHER fired once. His pistol shot struck not the beast, but the ground beneath it, where black blood had pooled into a symbol that hurt the eye. The sigil burst apart in a flash of plasma heat, and every whispering wound in the creature screamed at once. The lion used that heartbeat. His blade pierced the beast's throat and drove upward through the skull. The thing died badly. It thrashed, it split, it vomited blood and half-formed faces. It whispered bargains in the voices of fathers, brothers, dead squires and unborn sons. Men clamped hands over vox grills and ears. One initiate laughed until Luther struck him unconscious. Another tried to walk into the trees, murmuring that his mother was calling from beneath the roots. At last, the creature collapsed, its body steaming in the rain, its black blood running through the mud in thin streams that tried to form words. CYPHER watched those words. He alone did not look away. That night, beneath Alderuk, he descended into the vault. No honor guard followed him. No torch-bearing squire marked his path. The way opened only to his blood and the old codes of the Order. He passed through doors of ironwood and steel, through chambers lined with trophies from beasts whose names had been erased so they could not be summoned by memory. He walked beneath arches carved before the Imperium found Caliban, before the Emperor's ship split the sky, before the lion's sons learned to look upward and call it destiny. The vault was colder than the forest. Shelves of black stone held records bound in hide, bronze, bone and metal. Some were histories, some were confessions, some were warnings written by men who had gone mad proving they were correct. At the center stood a plinth beneath a hooded statue with no face. Upon it lay a casket sealed by chains and a lock made for no key. CYPHER opened it with blood. Inside rested the oldest prophecy in the Order's keeping, scratched into a plate of dark metal that had never rusted and never reflected flame. The script was Calibanite, but not holy. It bent around the eye. It resisted being read. He had seen it before, but never after a hunt where the forest itself had spoken through dead flesh. He read the line again. The Lord of mankind shall live by dying, and die by being kept alive. CYPHER stood very still. Above him, the lion prepared for wars among the stars. Luther smiled through wounds no apothecary would ever diagnose. The Order became legion by degrees. Caliban became compliant without ever becoming conquered. Terran words settled over old oaths like fresh paint over dried blood. Unity, truth, Imperium. CYPHER took a knife from his belt and cut his palm. Blood welled black in the vault's cold light. He pressed it to the prophecy plate and watched the old metal drink. "I hear," he said. The vault did not answer. It never had. He sealed the casket again, but not the oath. That remained open inside him, sharp and living. No chapter would record it. No lord would approve it. No primarch would be asked to bless it. One day, if the prophecy proved true, truth would have to be carried to terror through fire, denial, and the hatred of brothers. CYPHER bowed his hooded head before the faceless statue. "When lies become the throne," he whispered, "I will carry the blade to the heart of them." Far above, in the rain-washed dark, the forest remembered. So did the dead. Caliban died as it had lived, beneath a black sky, and among brothers with blades in their hands. The heresy was over, so the remembrances of distant worlds would later claim, scraping truth into approved shapes for the comfort of men who had never heard a legion scream. Horus was dead. Terror had endured. The War Master's hosts had broken upon the walls of the imperial palace and fled into the abyss, leaving behind oceans of blood, continents of ash, and an emperor interred in golden silence. Across the wounded Imperium, loyalists counted the cost in worlds, fleets, primarchs, and souls. But on Caliban, the war did not end. It came home. The skies burned with the wrath of the Lion's fleet. Void shields died in blinding hemispheres above fortress monasteries. Orbital lances stabbed through cloud and storm, turning mountain crowns into rivers of molten stone. Bombardment shells fell like iron scripture from the heavens, each impact a declaration written in fire across the ancient soil. Forests that had hunted mankind since before recorded memory became pillars of flame. Root systems older than dynasties shrieked in the deep earth as plasma fires boiled sap into poison steam. Beast-haunted wilds became burning pits, where things with too many limbs thrashed and died, their cries swallowed by artillery thunder. Alderuk shook. Its walls had defied monsters, rival houses, winters that killed livestock in their pens, and nights when the forest pressed close enough for men to hear claws testing stone. It had stood against every horror Caliban had birthed from fang, thorn, and nightmare. It had not been built to endure the vengeance of a Primarch. Within its halls, the Order tore itself apart. Loyalist dark angels advanced through the lower galleries beneath banners blackened by void ash. They came in disciplined kill formations, bolters raised, helms sealed, armor bearing the scars of the galaxy's greatest war. Many had returned from Terra too late to stand beside their father at the walls. Many had heard only fragments of what had happened there. The Emperor had fallen. Horus had died. Their brothers had turned. Their gene father had come back to Caliban, and Caliban had answered him with guns. That was enough. Across from them waited those who had remained. Luther's warriors, Caliban's sons. Knights made Astartes, Astartes made conspirators, and conspirators made desperate by the knowledge that every choice behind them had become a road to damnation. They stood in corridors where their own oaths had been spoken. They crouched behind statues of ancient heroes whose names predated the Imperium. They sighted along bolters over reliquary plinths, murder holes, feast tables, and broken chapel pews. Their armor bore the same colors. Their heraldry had once meant the same thing. Then the first bolter fired, and brotherhood became meat. Mass reactive shells crossed the Hall of Vows in a storm of explosive judgment. The first loyalist through the archway took 3 rounds to the breastplate. They punched through ceramite, detonated inside his fused ribs, and blew him backward in a wet burst of bone splinters and transhuman organs. His squad stepped over him without slowing. Their return fire shredded the rebels along the far wall. Helmets burst outward. Throats vanished in red fountains. One warrior dropped his bolter and tried to hold his abdomen closed as gene-wrought intestines slithered through his fingers in thick coils. A brother beside him put a bolt through his head before the screaming could spread. Above them, statues exploded. Ancient knights carved from black stone lost their faces to gunfire. Winged lions shattered. Heroes of Caliban's lost ages broke apart beneath the fury of their descendants, stone limbs tumbling into blood-slick corridors. Banners caught fire and burned with an oily stink as old dyes, old dust, and old honor became smoke. Servo lumens swung from chains, casting mad shadows over the carnage. Fortress serfs ran with ammunition crates clutched to their chests and died under stray fire by the dozens. Some were crushed beneath falling masonry. Some were ripped apart when bolt shells meant for giants found mortal flesh. Some knelt in corners and prayed to the lion, to the emperor, to Luther, to the forest, to anyone who might still listen. No one listened. CYPHER moved through it all beneath a hood darkened by ash. He did not march with the loyalists. He did not stand with Luther's line. He walked between collapsing certainties with a pistol in one hand and the sheathed sword across his back, passing through smoke, blood mist, and vox static, as though the fortress itself made room for him. Men saw him and hesitated. That hesitation saved some and killed others. In the gallery of sainted blades, a loyalist sergeant had been pinned beneath fallen stone, his armor cracked across both legs. A rebel stood above him, chains ward revving, Faceplate split open to show teeth clenched in grief rather than hatred. "Brother," the fallen loyalist said through blood-flecked vox. The rebel answered, "Do not call me that." CYPHER shot the rebel through the side of the helm. The bolt detonated inside the skull, spraying the gallery wall with pulped brain matter and shards of blackened bone. The body remained standing for a moment, chainsword whining in its dead hand, then folded forward onto the stones. The pinned sergeant stared up at CYPHER. "Why?" CYPHER looked down at him. "Because you asked the wrong question." He left the loyalist alive. 3 corridors later, he killed 2 warriors wearing the lion's mark as they dragged a wounded Calibanite from beneath a shrine and prepared to execute him. CYPHER's plasma pistol spat blue-white sunfire. The first loyalist vanished from the waist up, his torso becoming vapor, molten ceramite, and raining fragments of cooked meat. The second turned, already firing, and CYPHER's bolt round entered beneath his gorget and blew the back of his helm across the shrine wall. The wounded Calibanite looked at the corpses, then at CYPHER. "Were we betrayed?" he asked. CYPHER paused. From somewhere above came the roar of collapsing towers. The floor trembled. Dust fell like dirty snow. Another rebel dragged himself from behind an overturned reliquary. His right arm ended at the elbow in a ragged mass of torn black plate and cauterized flesh. He laughed once, bitter and broken. "No," he said. "Worse. We were necessary, and then we were inconvenient." The wounded warrior stared at him. CYPHER said nothing. He passed on, leaving both men to their truth and whatever death found them first. Alderuk became a butcher's maze. In the armory of oaths, dreadnought sarcophagi awakened to conflicting command signals and opened fire on both sides, their assault cannons chewing columns, warriors and serfs, into clouds of powdered stone and wet red pulp. In the Hall of Ashen Crowns, knights fought with blades because ammunition had run dry and smoke had blinded their auto-senses. Chainswords snarled until their teeth clogged with tendons. Power swords split helms and faces beneath them, cauterizing wounds for a heartbeat before pressure forced blood through the burns in black-red sheets. Men slipped in the fluids of their brothers and died on their knees, dragging killers down with them. The Vox was worse than the killing. It carried orders, prayers, accusations, death rattles, and half-heard confessions. It made every helm into a chapel of madness. Hold the eastern transept. Traitors in the reliquary. For the lion. For Caliban. Medicant by the throne, I cannot feel my hearts. Brother, lower your weapon. Luther commands us. The lion commands all. The forest is burning. Mercy. No mercy. Through it all, deeper than static and closer than thought, came another sound. A pressure, a psychic bruise spreading through the fortress stones. CYPHER felt it before the others named it. He felt it in his teeth, in the old scar across his palm, in the sheathed sword resting against his back. The Primarch had entered Alderuk. Lionel Johnson did not come as a savior. He descended like judgment given a body, like a blade that had learned to walk because the hand of fate required no wielder. He broke through the fortress war as though it were weather. Rebels died before him. Loyalists fell silent as he passed. His sword moved too quickly for mortal sight and too perfectly for mortal comprehension. Men did not duel him. They became brief obstructions. He cut through armor, flesh, bone, and oath with the same terrible precision. No one called him father. No one called him brother. No one called him lord, unless already kneeling. CYPHER saw him only once before the end, at the far side of a collapsing nave, framed by fire and shattered stained glass. The lion stood amid a circle of dead Calibanites. Some had been Astartes. Some had been old knights never remade by genecraft. One still clung to life, chest opened from collar to groin, organs steaming in the cold air. The dying man reached up toward the Primarch, not in attack, but supplication. The lion looked down. Whatever passed between them was lost beneath bombardment thunder. Then the Primarch moved on. CYPHER turned away first. The relic vault beneath Alderuk had not yet been breached. That was the only mercy the day had not strangled. He descended through access ways known only to the bearer of his title, sealing doors behind him with blood and code. Above, the fortress howled itself apart. Below, the old silence waited. The vault's guardians were dead. 2 Calibanite brothers in black robes lay across the threshold, cut open with chain blades. One had no head. The other had lived long enough to write a warning in his own blood across the floor, but shell shock had taken his discipline, and the letters wandered into meaningless strokes. CYPHER stepped over them and entered. The casket remained on its plinth. So did the sword. Not the blade he wore, not yet. This one lay sheathed in black leather, its hilt plain, its guard unadorned, its presence heavier than any crown. The weapon seemed to drink the light around it. The prophecy plate rested beneath it, still marked by CYPHER's old blood. The Lord of mankind shall live by dying, and die by being kept alive. The words did not glow. They did not whisper. True things rarely needed spectacle. CYPHER took the sheathed sword and fastened it across his back. Above him, the world screamed louder. The duel began somewhere high in the fortress, but its shadow reached everything. Lion and Luther met beyond CYPHER's sight. Later, legends would devour the truth. Some would say Luther begged forgiveness. Some would say he spat curses. Some would say the lion hesitated. Some would swear he did not. The dark angels would bury accounts beneath oaths, prisons, blades, and lies, until no 2 survivors could speak the same memory without fear. CYPHER knew only fragments. He heard Luther's voice over a dying Vox channel, not charming now, not warm, but vast with grief and power that was not wholly his own. You left us. Static. The lion's answer came like ice cracking underfoot. I trusted you. A burst of psychic force rolled through the fortress. Men screamed as blood poured from their eyes. Servo skulls exploded. Librarians miles away convulsed, their mouths forming words in dead Calibanite tongues. Fortress serfs fell where they stood, biting through their own tongues as visions burned their minds hollow. CYPHER staggered against the vault wall. For a heartbeat, he saw Luther crowned in shadow. He saw the lion haloed in cold fire. He saw old Caliban beneath new banners. He saw Terror's golden throne as a coffin. He saw brothers in bone armor hunting through centuries. He saw cells beneath a palace. He saw his own hands, older, bloodied, still refusing to draw the blade. Then the vision shattered. Caliban broke. The first rupture came from below, not above. The planet's old wounds opened beneath bombardment and sorcery, beneath grief, treachery, and the pressure of powers that had circled the world since men first lit fires against the dark. The forest did not burn any longer. It became flame. Mountains split. The skies folded inward. Alderuk's foundations groaned as though some buried god had woken hungry. Orbital fire continued to fall. Warp light rose to meet it. The fortress tore open. Entire decks peeled away from the world. Chapel floors lifted and turned inside out, spilling Astartes, mortal serfs, books, relics, broken statues, and screaming wounded into unreality. A library tower sheared free, its shelves vomiting centuries of records into a sky that had become a mouth. Men fell upward. Blood flowed in spirals. Fires burned green, then black, then colors no human eye was made to endure. A loyalist squad locked mag boots to a corridor that no longer obeyed gravity and fired until the walls became teeth around them. CYPHER ran, not from fear. Fear was too small for the moment. He ran because the sword had to move, and because truth did not matter if it died in a collapsing vault. The corridor ahead filled with fallen. Some shouted prayers to the Emperor, some cursed the lion, some called for Luther, Some tore off their helms as warp pressure pushed through their souls and made them see the faces of every brother they had killed. One laughed until demonic claws unfolded from his shadow and dragged him screaming through the floor. Another fired into the darkness until his bolter clicked empty, then beat his own helm against the wall in a frenzy, begging Caliban to forgive him. A warp rift opened across the corridor like a vertical wound. It took them by pieces. One warrior's arm vanished first, still firing into another century. Another was stretched thin as parchment, his scream becoming a line of sound that cut stone. A third froze in place, armor turning white with frost, before he exploded into fragments of blood-red ice. Shadows reached for CYPHER with fingers made from dead voices. He clutched the sheathed sword against his back. The blade did not leave its scabbard. Not then, not for Luther, not for the lion, not for Caliban dying around him, not for brothers screaming his title as accusation and plea. Reality tore him open. He felt his armor become ash. He felt his bones dragged through centuries. He saw wars not yet fought, and corpses long dead. He stood for a breath on a battlefield beneath alien suns, then in a void ship corridor full of flayed men, then in a cathedral where priests shouted his name as a curse, then in darkness beneath a palace where golden warriors waited with spears. Every moment cut him, every century left hooks in his flesh. The warp gnawed at his thoughts, offering reasons, excuses, absolutions. He accepted none of them. When the screaming ended, Caliban was gone. Not destroyed. That would have been cleaner. It had become absence, wound, debris, and legend. A dead world reduced to fragments, its truth scattered through time with the warriors who had stood upon it. The rock endured. A shard of the old fortress turned into a monastery of pursuit. The lion vanished into silence. Luther lived in chains. The sons of the First Legion gathered around the ruin and looked upon what remained of their home, their pride and their brotherhood. They chose secrecy. They chose it as starving men choose meat from the dead. The fallen must be hunted. The shame must be hidden. The Legion's wound must never be shown to the Imperium it had helped save. Interrogator chaplains would be raised like knives. Circles would form within circles. Truth would be measured in permissions. Brothers would lie to brothers for the good of all. Records would burn. Witnesses would vanish. Confession would become an art of pain. Repentance would become a word spoken through broken teeth. And somewhere beyond their reach, thrown through time with a sword still sheathed across his back, CYPHER understood the shape of the age to come. The Dark Angels had not buried their shame. They had enthroned it. From that day onward, truth itself became heresy. CYPHER crossed the centuries as other men crossed battlefields, leaving footprints in ash and questions in the blood. Where he walked, records died. Where he paused, wars remembered they had old wounds. Where he spoke, men who had lived on lies felt those lies twist like knives beneath the ribs. The Imperium named him traitor, renegade, deceiver, apostate, fallen. The Unforgiven named him worse in chambers where even chapter serfs were deafened before entry. Heretics named him Omen. Astropaths dreamed of a hooded warrior walking beneath a green sun with a sheathed blade upon his back, and woke screaming hard enough to split their tongues. Across the segmentum solar, he appeared in sealed chambers where planetary governors drowned in their own corruption. One such lord, pale and swollen in the silks of inherited authority, died behind 27 locks, 3 void-shielded doors, a regiment of household troops, and a choir of sanctioned psychers. His feast hall was found untouched, except for the governor himself, slumped across a table of imported meats, his skull opened by a bolt round fired at kissing distance. His blood had sprayed across petitions from starving districts he had condemned to silence. No witness saw the killer enter. No picked capture survived. The only sign was a scorch mark on the marble, shaped by accident or intention like a wing. In segmentum obscurus, CYPHER stood in the nave of a cathedral seized by the servants of the dark gods. A chaos warlord in baroque plate preached from the altar, his armor crawling with hooks, scripture, and the flayed faces of saints. Around him, cultists tore imperial citizens apart in sacrament, raising strips of skin like banners, while the cathedral bells rang backward. The warlord promised liberation. He promised the end of corpse worship. He promised his followers would be remade in the sight of powers that answered prayer with teeth. CYPHER listened from the shadows until the sermon reached its fever. Then his plasma pistol spoke. The warlord became blue-white fire from throat to spine. His helm burst first, disgorging flame, molten teeth, and boiling brain matter across the altar steps. The thing inside his armor tried to crawl free, a slick knot of warped sinew and shrieking eyes, and CYPHER put a bolt through it before it learned the shape of air. The cult fell upon itself in panic. Loyal prisoners broke their chains. The cathedral became a slaughterhouse of vengeance, and when the Dark Angels arrived 3 days later, they found no robed warrior, no captured relic, no clean testimony. They found hundreds of corpses, charred banners, surviving priests who spoke of an angel with pistols, and a single confession carved into the altar stone. Faith is not innocence. The priests were taken, the records burned. In Segmentum Pacificus, an inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus vanished after proclaiming he had uncovered the truth of the fallen. His ship emerged from the warp empty of command crew, drifting without vox response near a dead moon. Every astropath aboard had been blinded. Every data core had been wiped, except for one repeating phrase in Calibanite cipher. The phrase meant nothing to the Mechanicus Lex Mechanics, who died attempting to break it. It meant enough to the Dark Angels that an entire strike cruiser changed course without informing Imperial Command. In Segmentum Tempestus, 3 cult leaders who had gathered beneath a manufactorum hive to summon a demon prince were found seated around their ritual circle with their own severed hands nailed over their mouths. Their followers had butchered one another in the dark, maddened by contradictory orders broadcast through the vox, in a voice that sounded to each listener like the holiest authority he feared. Some heard the Emperor, some heard the War Master, some heard their dead fathers. When the manufactorum was cleansed by fire, the Prometheum tanks ignited too soon, and the detonation cooked thousands of workers in their HAB units. Men died screaming behind plasteel doors that glowed red, their hands fused to the inside as they clawed for air. CYPHER was seen walking through the evacuation corridors before the blast, a white robe moving through smoke and stampede, pistols holstered, sword undrawn. No one who saw him agreed on his face. In Ultima Segmentum, where the Imperium frayed beneath Xenos raids, traitor incursions, and the gnawing hunger of worlds too distant to save, his name became a curse uttered by officers before execution. On one Agri moon, loyalists became zealots because of him and burned their own granaries rather than let heretic hands touch imperial grain. On a forged satellite, traitors became reckless because of him and rose too early before their hidden armories were fully awakened. On a shrine world, a bishop confessed to selling pilgrim tithe fleets to raiders after receiving a single sealed letter written in a script older than the ecclesiarchy. CYPHER did not create guilt. He opened the doors men built around it. The hive world was called Merovash, though most of its citizens never heard the name. They knew only ash rain, ration sirens, corpse starch, labor bells, and the endless upward hunger of spires they would never enter. Its lower hives had fermented rebellion for generations, not rebellion with banners and speeches, but the older kind, the kind that grew in lung rot, unpaid tithe quotas, vanished sons, and overseers who laughed while children starved beneath statues of imperial saints. Chaos found the wound and pushed. At first it came as whispers in sump chapels, then as symbols daubed in blood behind manufactorum shrines, then as men with too many teeth leading work gangs into murder. By the time the planetary governor admitted there was an uprising, 6 billion souls were already within the contagion zone, and the Astra Militarum had begun shelling districts still marked loyal on the maps. CYPHER entered Meravash through a corpse chute beneath Hive Tertian, wrapped in the stink of disinfectant and burning fat. The guardsmen holding the inner transit bastion were dying by inches. They belonged to the Varden 39th, a regiment reduced to mud-coloured uniforms, cracked rebreathers, and eyes that had seen too much close work with bayonets. Their captain was dead. Their commissar hung from a signal gantry with his organs pulled through his mouth by cult hooks. The men had built a barricade out of ammunition crates, hab doors, and the bodies of those too mangled to move. Beyond it, the tunnel roared with the approach of the damned. Private Halbrecht saw CYPHER first. He raised his lasgun with shaking hands. "Identify yourself, by order of the throne." CYPHER walked into the lumen glow. His robe was stained black at the hem. His armor was dark green beneath it. His pistols rested at his sides. The sheathed sword crossed his back like a silent accusation. "Hold this bastion," CYPHER said. Halbrecht swallowed. Around him, the other guardsmen stared. Some crossed themselves with the sign of the Aquila. Some muttered prayers. One began to weep without sound. "We cannot," Halbrecht said. CYPHER looked down the tunnel. The first cultists were visible now, a tide of rag-wrapped bodies, industrial blades, mining tools, stolen autoguns, and faces carved with devotion. Behind them came heavier shapes, mutants swollen by the warp, ogrins with chains through their eyes, a preacher wearing a cloak of guardsmen's scalps, dragging an icon made from a tank hatch and human spines. "You will," CYPHER said. It was not encouragement. It was judgment. The first wave hit the barricade and vanished in lasfire. Beams cut through smoke. Men screamed. Cultists burst open under close-range volleys, chests steaming, limbs jerking, faces melting where shots struck bone. Autogun rounds hammered the barricade. A guardsman beside Halbrecht took a round through the cheek and another through the throat, dropping with his tongue hanging through the red hole in his face. CYPHER drew his bolt pistol. Each shot was a sentence. A cult champion vaulted the barricade, chain axe raised, shrieking praise to the warp. CYPHER shot him through the breastbone. The bolt detonated inside the man's torso and blue ribs, lungs and wet fragments of heart across 3 guardsmen. Another mutant came crawling over the dead, hands like cleavers, belly dragging through blood. Plasma fire took it in the skull. Its head vanished in a burst of sun-hot vapor, and the body ran 3 more steps before collapsing into its own steaming neck meat. "Advance," CYPHER said. Halbrecht stared at him. "My lord?" "Advance." Something in the word broke the regiment's despair and remade it as obedience. The Vardens rose from behind their barricade and charged into the tunnel behind him, screaming the Emperor's name because terror needed a shape, and faith was the only one they had been issued. CYPHER walked at their head. He did not run. He did not shout. He fired left and right, bolt and plasma, turning leaders into explosions and monsters into ruin. Men rallied to him because he seemed impossible to kill. Men died around him because that belief made them brave. The battle spilled into the processional of St. Corvain, a concourse wide enough for armored columns. There, the rebellion met the Imperial counterattack. Lehman Russ tanks rolled through the smoke, their tracks grinding corpses into red paste and bone grit. Chimera transports burned beneath firebombs, their rear hatches jammed, the men inside cooking alive in their armor while their fists hammered against the doors. Promethium washed across the concourse from Hellhound tanks in roaring sheets. Cultists became torches, running blind, skin sloughing from muscle, mouths open in black holes of sound. Some kept coming while they burned. A flame-wreathed mutant reached a squad before collapsing, and its body burst across them, spraying burning fat that stuck to uniforms and faces. Mass reactive shells from Astartes bolters joined the thunder. Not dark angels. Not yet. A demi-company of another chapter had answered the distress call, slate-grey warriors with no patience for distinction between loyal hab-worker and heretic once the melee swallowed both. Their bolters spoke from the western arch. Each impact made a man cease to be a man. Heads became mist. Torsos opened like butchered livestock. The concourse floor turned slick enough that guardsmen fell and were crushed under their own tanks, their screams cut short beneath grinding adamantium. CYPHER moved through it untouched, not unmarked. Blood painted his robe. Bone fragments clicked from his armor. Heat shimmered around his plasma pistol. But the battle seemed to bend away from him, as if death knew him by an older title and chose lesser prey. Halbrecht followed until his lasgun ran dry, until his bayonet snapped in a cultist's spine, until he killed with a trench knife and his teeth bared like an animal. When the last rebel icon fell, the guardsman dropped to his knees amid steaming offal and spent casings. CYPHER stood above him. Halbrecht looked up, face streaked with blood, not all his own. "You are an angel," he said. CYPHER's hood turned toward him. "No, angels are made to be worshipped. I was made to be blamed." Then he was gone into the smoke, descending through a maintenance hatch, while the survivors shouted after him, and the tanks rolled on, crushing the dying because the advance could not halt for mercy. The Dark Angels came 6 hours later. They came without heraldry visible to the general command net, descending in gunships painted black and green, their transponders masked beneath authority codes that made mortal officers go pale. Interrogator chaplains walked among the survivors. Ravenwing riders sealed the roads. Deathwing terminators entered the lower hive and did not emerge until every witness worth taking had been taken. Halbrecht was dragged before a warrior in a skull helm, younger then, though youth meant little among the Adeptus Astartes. Mordain Barakiel had not yet become the nightmare he would later be, but the shape of him was already present. His voice was controlled. His rage was not. Describe the robed warrior. Halbrecht's lips were split. His hands shook from stims and blood loss. "He saved us." The Crozius touched his chest, light crackling across the Aquila on his flak armor. "Describe him." "Dark armor, white robe, pistols, a sword he did not draw." Barakiel leaned closer. "What did he say?" Halbrecht hesitated. The chaplain heard the hesitation. By dawn, the Varden 39th no longer existed in Imperial record. Its survivors were reassigned, detained, mind-scrubbed, or executed as contamination risks. The shrine logs were burned. The battle picts were seized. The grey-armoured Astartes were informed that operational authority had transferred. The governor signed the silence order with a hand that would not stop trembling. Barakiel found CYPHER 2 months later beneath a cathedral on Valkior's moon. He was not alone. Deathwing terminators advanced with him through crypt aisles, while the cathedral collapsed above them under artillery and storm. CYPHER stood at the far end of the nave, framed by falling stone and stained glass dust, the sheathed sword across his back. "Repent," Barakiel commanded. CYPHER fired into the ceiling. For one heartbeat, Barakiel thought the fallen had missed. Then the cathedral came down. Statues larger than battle tanks broke from their niches and fell. Pillars burst. The roof split. Deathwing warriors vanished beneath thousands of tons of consecrated stone. One Terminator was crushed flat enough that blood and amniotic sarcophagus fluid jetted from every joint in his armor. Another lost both legs beneath a fallen saint and kept firing until the nave floor gave way beneath him. Barakiel survived beneath a sloping slab of marble, pinned, watching through cracked lenses as CYPHER walked away through dust and ruin. Their eyes met across the collapse. CYPHER did not speak. That was worse. Years became centuries. Sightings became legends. Legends became forbidden data. Forbidden data became death sentences. In some sectors, vox ghosts carried the rumor of the voice of the Emperor. a robed figure broadcasting across compromised shrine networks, speaking not as a preacher, but as a verdict. On one world, his words drove imperial defenders to hold against impossible odds. On another, they drove miners to rise against a governor whose tithe fraud had starved them for generations. The ecclesiarchy called the broadcasts counterfeit. The Inquisition called them sedition. The poor called them miracles. The Dark Angels called them evidence. CYPHER called them tools. The fragment came to him on a dead forge moon, orbiting a star that had burned green since the heresy. Its last guardian was a tech priest, reduced to a torso, a skull, and a forest of mechadendrites plugged into a reliquary engine. The priest had killed his own acolytes when they tried to transmit the archive to Mars. He had waited 300 years for someone whose gene markers matched no loyal registry, but opened the oldest lock. Designation, the priest rasped. CYPHER. Name not accepted. Title accepted. The machine considered this. Somewhere beneath the floor, gears turned that had not moved since before the ecclesiarchy had a name. Title accepted. The reliquary opened. Inside lay a shard of black golden throne architecture. Not complete, not enough to repair, not enough to destroy. Enough to reveal that the throne was not merely a seat, not merely a life engine, not merely the heart of the Astronomicon. Enough to prove it was also a cage. CYPHER closed his fist around the fragment. Behind him, the forge moon began to die. The Dark Angels had entered orbit. Their bombardment turned the horizon white. CYPHER looked toward the burning sky and felt the old oath tighten around his heart. 10,000 years of ash had not buried the truth. It had preserved it. The sword had never been drawn in anger. That truth had killed men. It had killed brothers who believed patience was cowardice. It had killed warriors who mistook restraint for weakness. It had killed zealots who thought every relic existed to be brandished, every oath to be shouted, every hidden thing to be exposed beneath the glare of war. Across the long centuries, men had reached for it, begged for it, cursed it, knelt before it, demanded it, and died with its name half-formed upon their tongues. CYPHER carried it as a man carries a sentence already passed. It rested across his back, beneath the pale ruin of his robe, sheathed in dark leather that no flame had ever consumed and no blade had ever cut. Its hilt was plain. Its guard bore no jewels, no gilt, no proud aquila, no calibanite lion worked in silver. It was not beautiful. Beauty invited hands. Beauty invited songs. Beauty invited fools to believe they understood what they saw. The sword invited silence. Haroth hated it. The fallen. Brother walked behind CYPHER through the bones of the dead ship, his boots grinding spent brass, powdered bone, and blackened devotional script into the deck. He had once been a knight of Caliban, though little of that old nobility remained. His armor had been repaired too many times by too many desperate hands. Plates from different marks of war gear made him look pieced together from memory and theft. A helm shaped like a snarling beast hung at his belt, its lenses cracked. His face was bare, scarred, pale beneath the grime of void war, and his eyes burned with the restless anger of a man who had survived too long without absolution. Ahead of them, the corridor breathed. It was not a metaphor. The ship had been a pilgrim carrier once, part of a convoy bound toward a shrine world that no longer answered imperial calls. Now its walls pulsed beneath layers of rust and scripture. Veins of red flesh threaded through the metal. Icons of the Emperor had been turned upside down, their faces gouged away and replaced with snarling runes carved in dried blood. Vox speakers whispered prayers in reverse. Somewhere deeper in the vessel, men screamed in ritual rhythm, their agony rising and falling with the drumming of armored fists against iron. Word-bearers. CYPHER had known before boarding. The signs were too precise, too theatrical, too devoted. The sons of Lorgar did not merely conquer, they consecrated. They turned murder into liturgy, and treachery into doctrine. Where other traitors killed for hatred, hunger, or spite, the word-bearers killed to prove the universe had meaning, and that meaning was submission before the dark gods. Haroth spat onto the deck. The saliva sizzled where it struck a vein in the metal. They knew we were coming. "Yes," CYPHER said. "You allowed it." "Yes." Haroth's hand tightened around the grip of his chainsword. "Your habit of answering like a tomb door will get us both killed." "It has not yet. Do not mistake survival for victory." CYPHER paused beside a shrine alcove where the corpse of a pilgrim had been nailed to the wall through wrists, throat, and eyes. Pages from an imperial prayer book had been sewn into the dead man's opened abdomen. The body twitched as they passed, though it had no lungs with which to breathe. "No," CYPHER said. "That mistake belongs to the Imperium." The first demon came out of the ceiling. It unfolded from a patch of shadow between hanging cables, limbs cracking into place, its flesh the color of old bruises and fresh wounds. It had no face, only a vertical mouth filled with fingers. Haroth reacted first. His chainsword screamed awake and bit upward, chewing through the thing's chest in a spray of black ichor and pale gristle. The demon shrieked through its finger mouth, clutching at the blade, its talons scraping sparks from Haroth's pauldron. CYPHER shot it through the skull with his bolt pistol. The shell detonated inside the creature's head and burst it outward in a wet blossom of warp meat, teeth, and burning shadow. Its body collapsed across Haroth and dissolved into smoke that smelled of rot, incense, and old betrayal. More came from the walls. They tore themselves free from the living metal in a frenzy of claws and wet birth sounds, demonic things born from the word-bearers' rites. Some crawled on too many knees. Some dragged chains made from tongues. One wore the stretched faces of murdered pilgrims across its shoulders like a cloak, each face weeping and whispering prayers to a god that could not hear them through the static of damnation. Haroth laughed like a man trying to spit fear from his mouth. "At last," he snarled, "something honest." They met the demons in the corridor's red gloom. Haroth charged with chainblade and bolt pistol, roaring old Calibanite curses that had never been meant for the stars. His chainsword opened bellies, severed hands, split jawless heads, and sprayed his armor with filth that hissed against ceramite. He fought as if each kill were an answer to an accusation only he could hear. CYPHER moved differently. He did not rage. He did not shout. His pistols came up, one in each hand, bolt and plasma, judgment and sunfire. A bolt round punched through a demon's ribcage and detonated, blowing its torso into a storm of cracked bone and steaming black organs. Plasma struck a possessed pilgrim in the chest, turning his torso into a glowing crater and boiling the blood inside him until his limbs burst apart at the joints. Another shot removed the head of a chanting cultist behind the demon line, painting the bulkhead with skull fragments and a fan of grey matter. Still, he did not touch the sword. The word-bearers emerged after their pets. They came in crimson armor covered in parchment, scripture, chains, and flayed skin. Horns curled from helms. Books hung from their belts bound in hide that had once spoken. Their eye lenses burned with fanatic fire. They advanced while chanting, not as a war band, but as a procession, bolters raised like censers, blades crackling with demonic light. "False bearer," one intoned. "Thief of destiny," said another. "Relic carrion," growled a third. Their leader strode at the center, a dark apostle with a crozius shaped from black iron and bone, his armor crawling with engraved prayers. Servo skulls orbited him, each one mouthing a different blasphemous hymn. A chain of severed hands hung across his chest, each palm branded with a sigil of one of the dark gods. "CYPHER," the apostle said, his voice layered with echoes that did not belong to his throat. "Long have the powers watched the road beneath your feet." CYPHER fired. The apostle raised his crozius, and the bolt round burst against a shimmering ward, scattering fragments into the cultists kneeling around him. One mortal lost half his face and kept chanting through the ruin until a second shell from CYPHER's pistol turned his skull into mist. Haroth came to CYPHER's side, panting through clenched teeth. "Draw it!" CYPHER fired again. "No." A word-bearer struck from the left with a chain axe. CYPHER turned aside, shot the warrior through the knee, then put a plasma blast into the exposed throat seal as the traitor fell. The word-bearer's head vanished into incandescent vapor. Molten ceramite ran down the chest plate in glowing streams, carrying scraps of cooked flesh with it. Haroth killed another with his chainsword, driving the weapon into the traitor's belly and wrenching upward until the roaring teeth burst out through the sternum in a spray of rib shards and shredded hearts. "Draw the cursed blade," Haroth snarled. "If it is what they want, deny them by using it." CYPHER stepped back from a demon's lunge and shot both its knees apart. It collapsed, dragging itself forward by its claws, until a bolt shell through the open mouth burst the back of its skull across the deck. "No!" Haroth rounded on him, fury naked now. "Is it a weapon or a relic?" CYPHER turned his hooded gaze toward him. "Those are the same thing when empires are dying." The apostle laughed, and the sound made the flesh veins in the walls pulse faster. "Wisdom from the Forsaken. How precious, how hollow. You carry the blade and pretend you are not its sheath. You think restraint makes you master of destiny. It makes you a locked door waiting for the proper key." Haroth pointed his chainsword at the sheathed weapon on CYPHER's back. Blood and demon filth dripped from its teeth. "Tell me the truth for once. Can it kill him?" The battle did not cease. It narrowed. Bolters roared in the corridor. Cultists died in heaps. Demons clawed across the ceiling and burst under fire. The word-bearers advanced through their own dead, chanting louder as gore slicked their boots. CYPHER answered while killing. "Many believe so. I asked what you believe." CYPHER shot a word-bearer through the eye lens. The bolt detonated inside the helm, blowing the traitor's skull apart, but leaving the faceplate momentarily intact before blood pressure blasted it outward. "I believe death is not the only chain." Haroth stared at him, breathing hard, eyes bright with hate, hope, and old fear. CYPHER continued. "The Emperor sits between endings, corpse and god, beacon and prisoner, wound and weapon. The throne sustains him, but it also binds him. It keeps his body from death and his soul from whatever lies beyond death. It holds the gate shut while mankind kneels before his agony and calls the sound of his suffering stability." Haroth's lips peeled back from his teeth. "You speak like a heretic. I speak like a witness. The Imperium would burn worlds for that thought. The Imperium burns worlds for less." The apostle raised his crozius, and the corridor became scripture made flesh. Runes ignited along the walls. The bodies of dead cultists split open and released long tendrils of black smoke. The smoke became grasping hands. The hands became mouths. The mouths recited names of demons that made mortal ears bleed. A dozen word-bearers charged. CYPHER and Haroth met them in a storm of fire and teeth. Haroth took a bolt round to the shoulder that burst one pauldron apart and tore meat from beneath it in red chunks. He staggered, roaring, and rammed his chainsword into the attacker's groin, lifting the blade through pelvis, organs, and spine until the traitor shook himself apart around the weapon. CYPHER's plasma pistol overheated for a breath, venting blue flame around his gauntlet. He did not flinch. His bolt pistol fired again and again, each shell finding weak points, joints, throats, lenses, exposed cables, scripture seals, hiding armor cracks. One possessed Astartes broke through. Its armor had fused with the thing inside it. Horns erupted from the helm. A second mouth had opened across its breastplate, lined with yellow teeth and vomiting smoke. It struck CYPHER hard enough to hurl him into the wall. Metal dented. Flesh veins burst around him. The possessed warrior pinned him there and reached for the sword. CYPHER released his plasma pistol and caught the grasping wrist. For the first time, the apostle stopped chanting. Every eye turned toward the sheathed blade. The possessed Astartes laughed through both mouths. "Draw it!" CYPHER's bolt pistol pressed under the creature's chin. "No." The shot blew the upper skull apart. The possessed thing kept moving. Its chest mouth screamed until CYPHER drove the pistol into that mouth and fired twice more. The torso burst outward from within, showering him in molten armor fragments, cooked organs and demonic smoke. He stepped free of the wall. The sword remained sheathed. The apostle retreated too late. Haroth reached him first, crashing into the dark apostle with the fury of a collapsing tower. Crozius met Chainsward. Sparks and warp light spilled across the corridor. The apostle was stronger, swollen by the favor of his gods, but Haroth fought with the suicidal spite of a son of Caliban who had already lost home, father, brotherhood, and history. He took a blow that cracked his breastplate. He took another that broke ribs. Then he head-butted the apostle hard enough to shatter his own brow and drove a combat knife through the traitor's lower jaw. CYPHER's plasma pistol came back into his hand. The shot took the apostle in the abdomen and folded him around a bloom of white-blue fire. Armor ran like wax. Flesh boiled. His spine showed for a moment through the molten ruin of his back before he fell. The surviving word-bearers died badly. One tried to flee and was cut down by Haroth from behind, chain teeth chewing through the back of the neck and spraying the walls with chopped vertebrae. Another knelt and began a hymn, only for CYPHER to shoot him through the mouth. A third, pinned beneath a fallen support beam, laughed as his lungs filled with blood. CYPHER stood over him. The word-bearer's helm was gone. His face had been ruined from jaw to cheekbone. Teeth hung from strings of meat. One eye had burst in its socket. He laughed anyway, each sound bubbling through torn flesh. "You think you hide from them," the traitor gurgled. "From us, from your brothers, from the corpse on Terra. You think the sword is secret. It is not. The gods have looked upon the shadow it casts." Haroth limped closer. "Let him speak." CYPHER did not look at him. The word-bearer grinned through blood. "Chaos does not fear the Emperor's death, Fallen. Death has circled him for 10,000 years and grown fat on the waiting. The gods fear only one outcome." CYPHER's pistol rose. The word-bearer's remaining eye widened with delight. "Not the Emperor dying," he laughed. "The Emperor waking. And when the right is named, when the gate is opened by the word of..." CYPHER fired. The bolt round entered the word-bearer's open mouth and detonated halfway through the skull. The head burst across the deck in a wet fan of brains, teeth, bone, and scraps of tongue. The body twitched once, then sagged beneath the beam. Haroth stared at the corpse. He was going to name it. "Yes, you knew the name already." CYPHER holstered his pistol. Haroth's expression hardened. "How long?" CYPHER looked down the corridor, where fires licked at the living walls and dead demons evaporated into greasy smoke. The ship trembled around them. Somewhere in its depths, the warp rights were failing. Somewhere beyond the hull, void and stars waited with their ancient indifference. "How long have I known?" CYPHER asked. "Or how long has mankind been praying for its own jailer to tighten the lock?" Haroth took a step toward him. His chainsword hung low, still revving, still dripping. "You carry a blade that might murder the master of mankind." "No." "You carry a blade that might free him." "Perhaps." "Those are the same thing." CYPHER turned then, and Haroth saw something in the shadow of the hood that made even his anger pause. Not doubt, not fear, something worse. Certainty that had survived too many centuries to need defending. "Yes," CYPHER said. The dying ship groaned. A section of ceiling collapsed behind them, crushing corpses into black paste and sparks. Vacuum howled somewhere far away, eating chambers one by one. Warning klaxons began to cry in a language the ship had forgotten. Haroth looked at the sword. "Will you ever draw it?" CYPHER's hand moved, not to the hilt, but to the strap that held the scabbard against him. He touched it lightly, as a penitent might touch a wound beneath bandages. Once. When? CYPHER walked past him, toward the smoke, toward the next corridor, toward the next century of pursuit. Before the golden throne. Haroth followed, limping, bleeding, furious and afraid. Only then did CYPHER speak the rest, his voice almost lost beneath the ship's death throes. When the galaxy must learn whether salvation and murder are the same act. Robert Guilliman returned to a galaxy that had forgotten how to be ashamed. He had awakened beneath the gaze of warriors who called him Lord, Gene-Sire, Avenging Son, Primarch, Regent, Savior. They knelt before him in armor his own age could not have forged, bearing oaths layered atop oaths until duty had become a kind of suffocation. They brought him reports in voices disciplined by fear. They showed him maps of burning sectors, tithes paid in bodies, worlds abandoned because no fleet could reach them, and shrine ledgers where starvation was recorded as devotional efficiency. They spoke of saints, miracles, relics, crusades, and sacred blood. They spoke of his father as a god. That was the wound that would not close. Guilliman stood upon the strategium deck of the Macrage's honor and watched the void burn beyond the armored glass. He was immense in the blue and gold of Ultramar, a king made for war and reason, reborn into an age that had murdered reason and dressed the corpse in vestments. The armor of fate breathed and whispered around him, its alien and imperial workings keeping death from reclaiming him. His face held the same regal severity that had cowed worlds during the Great Crusade, but exhaustion lived behind his eyes now. Not mortal weariness, not weakness, something deeper. The fatigue of a mind built to order empires and forced to govern a charnel house that praised its own decay. The Imperium had endured. That was the most terrible part. It had endured like a corpse nailed upright to frighten wolves. It had endured through ignorance, fanaticism, cruelty, inertia, and oceans of human blood. It had endured by turning his father's name into a weapon and his father's vision into a tomb. The fleet drove toward Terra through a sky that no longer obeyed the laws of creation. The great rift had opened across the galaxy like the cut of a god's blade, and the warp poured its madness into real space. Stars vanished behind bruised curtains of unreality. Astropathic choirs died screaming in their iron sanctums. Navigators clawed at the inside of their third-eye veils and babbled of teeth between the stars. Around the Terran-bound crusade, ships translated in ragged formation, some arriving intact, some bleeding flame from wounds no weapon had made, some emerging with their crews already dead and still walking. Dozens of vessels had begun the passage. Not all would survive it. Aboard every ship, millions served without knowing whether their deaths would matter. Ratings dragged macro shells into cathedral-sized breaches, while priests whipped hymns into their backs. Engine seers chanted to plasma conduits hot enough to boil marrow. Armsmen stood at bulkheads with shot cannons and shock mauls, waiting for the first sound of claws on the other side. Ultramarines occupied mustering decks in perfect silence, bolters mag-locked, helms sealed, blades blessed by rites Guilliman had never written and would never have approved. And among them moved the fallen. They did not wear the colors of open loyalty. Their armor bore no clean heraldry. Some wore robes over ancient plate. Some had scraped their pauldrons bare. Some carried the old marks of the First Legion beneath battle damage and intentional defacement. They moved like men accustomed to being hunted even among allies. They did not speak to the Ultramarines unless necessity demanded it, and the sons of Ultramar answered with the curt discipline of warriors ordered not to kill men they had every reason to despise. CYPHER stood before Guilliman as the fleet shook around them. The chamber was ringed by Victrix guard, their shields raised, their crests motionless, despite the tremor passing through the deck. Ultramarines officers watched from command stations, faces hidden behind helms or held in rigid masks of obedience. No one trusted the hooded figure in the pale robe. No one ignored him either. His pistols rested at his sides. The sword remained sheathed across his back. Guilliman studied him with the concentration of a strategist examining a blade found in his own bedchamber. "I will not trust you, Fallen." CYPHER inclined his hooded head. "Trust is a luxury of stable empires, Lord. Yours is burning." Several Ultramarines tightened their grip on their weapons. The Victrix Guard did not move. Their discipline was absolute, but the insult had entered the room and drawn blood without touching flesh. Guilliman's gaze did not waver. "You speak as though you stand outside its ruin." "No, I stand beneath it, as all men do." "You aided my passage." "Yes, not for loyalty. No, not for repentance." CYPHER was silent for a moment. Beyond the chamber walls, the ship's engines thundered like chained suns. Repentance is a word men use when they believe someone is listening. Guilliman's expression hardened. "Then why?" "Because you can open the road to terror. And you need that road." "Yes." "For what purpose?" CYPHER looked toward the void glass, though no view of terror lay beyond it yet. Only storm, fire, and the madness between stars. "To finish an oath older than your father's church." Guilliman did not answer at once. He hated that answer, not because it was evasive, though it was, not because it was proud, though it was that as well. He hated it because he sensed truth within it, and truth had become the rarest poison in the Imperium. The alarms began as a low chime. Then the ship lurched hard enough to throw mortal officers from their stations. Runes screamed red across strategium displays. Vox traffic erupted in overlapping bursts. Void shields taking empiric shear. Portside escort lost. No wreckage. No signal. Geller field fluctuation across the aft shrine decks. Enemy translation signatures with information. Boarding impact. Multiple impacts. Spinal basilica breached. Guilliman turned, and the exhaustion vanished from him. What remained was command. "Seal the breach sectors. Dispatch the Tetrarch's honor to screen the starboard flank. Have the escorts close formation by prow alignment. All companies to repel boarders." An Ultramarines captain struck fist to breastplate. "By your will." CYPHER was already moving. Guilliman's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Fallen." CYPHER paused. "You will remain under guard." "No," CYPHER said. The Victrix Guard stepped forward as one. CYPHER did not reach for his weapons. He simply looked back over his shoulder. "The attack in the Spinal Basilica is not the assault. It is the hymn. Kill the singers, or your fleet dies praising its own slaughter." Guilliman stared at him for a heartbeat, then understood enough to hate the necessity. "Captain Decimus, take a squad. Watch him. If he turns his weapons upon us, end him." CYPHER gave no sign of satisfaction. "As you command, Lord of Ultramar." The Spinal Basilica ran along the cruiser's inner spine, a vaulted artery of stone, steel, banners, and plasma-lit chapels, where thousands of crewmen gathered before battle to hear priests turn fear into obedience. Now it had become a killing ground. Chaos boarders flooded through impact breaches torn in the upper vaults. Boarding torpedoes had punched through the hull and disgorged traitor Astartes, mutants, cult shock troops, and things that dragged chains through the air without touching the deck. Word-bearers led the assault, crimson armor lit by the glow of burning sensors and muzzle flare. Their chants rolled above the screams, each syllable cutting at sanity. The Ultramarines held formation beneath statues of Imperial Saints Guilliman would have considered politically useful in life and grotesque in worship. They fired in disciplined ranks, blue armor steady amid smoke and falling masonry. Bolters spoke in controlled volleys. Traitor bodies burst open beneath mass reactive impacts. A cult horde broke against the firing line and dissolved into meat. Limbs flew, heads vanished, ribs opened outward as shells detonated inside chests. The basilica floor became slick with blood, oil, spent casings, and the mashed remains of thousands. The fallen fought beside them in silence. That silence was worse than curses. An ultramarine sergeant saw a robed warrior in old black-green plate drag a wounded battle brother away from a demon blade, only to turn and execute a possessed crewman with a single bolt to the mouth. The sergeant hesitated before nodding once. The fallen did not nod back. He reloaded and returned to killing. Haroth was among them, limping from older wounds, still furious, still alive. He fought like a man trying to murder history one body at a time. His chainsword chewed through a mutant's shoulder, lodged in the spine, and came free in a spray of bone dust and blood. A word-bearer struck him with a mace, crushing one side of his breastplate. Haroth headbutted the traitor, cracked his own brow open, and rammed a combat blade beneath the enemy's helm seal. The word-bearer died choking on blood and hate. Ultramarines saw the fallen kill for them. Fallen saw Ultramarines die with discipline that belonged to the old legions. Neither side mistook the moment for forgiveness. Above, the traitor assault widened. Demons poured from a rupture in the air before the high altar. They came howling through split reality, horned, clawed, wet with the filth of the warp. Bloodletters crashed into mortal armsmen and began butchery with brass blades. Men came apart beneath them. One demon carved through a line of naval troops, cutting each man from shoulder to hip, so their bodies fell in steaming halves. Another leapt onto a pulpit and tore a preacher open, pulling the man's intestines free in glistening loops before using them to garrote the acolyte beside him. The basilica shook with prayer and gunfire. Captain Decimus kept his squad near CYPHER as ordered, though the fallen had not gone toward the main assault. He moved through side aisles, past burning confession shrines and maintenance arches, while the worst of the battle roared behind them. "You flee the breach," Decimus said over the vox. CYPHER fired his plasma pistol into a shadowed archway. A cult assassin hidden there became a burst of vapor and flaming cloth. "I follow the hand that opened it. You will explain." "No, you will keep pace." The Ultramarine did, though anger sharpened every step. They descended into the basilica's service passages, where incense pipes, reliquary ducts, and coolant arteries ran behind the sacred architecture. The walls sweated. Frost formed and melted in the same breath. Vox signals distorted into laughter.
Remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support helps.
The chanting from the basilica became clearer here, not louder, but truer, as if the visible word-bearers above were only mouths, and the real voice spoke below. They found the sorcerers in a chamber behind the spinal altar. There were 3 of them, word-bearers in crimson and black, standing around a pit cut into the deck. Crewmen hung above the pit on hooks, still alive, their blood draining in steady streams into a circle of scripture. The sorcerers had removed their helms. Their faces were tattooed with words that moved when not looked at directly. Their mouths chanted in 3 different languages at once. In the pit below them, something vast pressed against the skin of reality. Captain Decimus raised his bolter. CYPHER was faster. His bolt pistol fired twice. The first shell struck a sorcerer in the throat and exploded, blasting his head backward by a thread of spine before it tore free and bounced into the blood pit. The second shell punched through another's open mouth and detonated inside the skull, spraying brains, teeth, and warp fire across the circle. The third sorcerer completed a word. The chamber folded. One Ultramarine vanished into the wall as if dragged beneath water, his armor crushing inward with a metallic shriek as stone closed through him. Another was lifted from the floor, limbs twisting backward, bones cracking inside ceramite, while invisible hands tried to make a new shape of him. Decimus fired into the sorcerer's chest, but the shells burst against a shield of screaming faces. CYPHER stepped through the storm. The sorcerer looked at the sword upon his back and laughed with sudden terror. "Draw it, fallen!" CYPHER shot him in the knee. The shield flickered. Decimus fired again, hammering the sorcerer's torso with mass-reactive shells. Armor cracked, blood sprayed. The sorcerer stumbled but did not fall, still chanting through broken teeth. CYPHER put his plasma pistol beneath the word-bearer's chin. No. The shot turned the upper half of the sorcerer into a plume of blue fire and molten bone. The ritual circle broke. The blood pit screamed. The pressure beneath reality recoiled, tearing the remaining hooked crewmen apart as it withdrew. Their bodies burst in mid-air, raining organs, blood and fragments of spine across the chamber. In the basilica above, the demonic breach collapsed. The ultramarines drove forward. Guilliman entered the spinal basilica, while the last of the boarders were dying. He came like the return of a lost age, towering above his sons, the Emperor's sword burning in his hand. Wherever he struck, traitors ceased. A word-bearer champion roared a challenge and swung a demon blade wreathed in black fire. Guilliman cut through blade, arm, torso and spine in one motion, leaving the traitor to fall in 4 burning pieces. A demon leapt upon him and was smashed aside, then split from crown to groin by fire that made even the warp recoil. His sons advanced behind him in perfect order. Bolters roared, chainswords screamed, traitors died under disciplined wrath. The basilica became an abattoir of broken crimson plate, steaming demonic ichor, and mortal dead piled so deep that warriors fought atop hills of flesh. The fallen emerged from the side passages into that carnage, bloodied but alive. Ultramarines turned weapons toward them for a heartbeat, then held fire. Guilliman saw CYPHER across the ruin. He also saw that the demonic breach was gone. The battle ended not with silence, but with the lesser noises of survival. Wounded men moaned, flames crackled, servitors dragged corpses into sorting piles. Apothecaries moved among fallen Astartes, harvesting gene seed with reverent efficiency. Priests tried to raise hymns and found the words drowned by the stink of opened bowels, burnt hair and hot metal. Guilliman approached CYPHER amid the dead. You struck at the ritual source. Yes. You preserved the ship. I preserved the root. The Primarch's expression remained severe. There is a difference. To you. Guilliman's jaw tightened. You refuse gratitude before it is offered. Gratitude creates debts. I have enough chains. You speak to me as though I am merely useful. CYPHER looked up at him, and the hood's shadow made his face unreadable. You are the only living authority who can pass through the gates ahead without being slain by the guardians behind them. That makes you more than useful. Several ultramarines bristled. Guilliman raised one hand, and they stilled. A key, then, the Primarch said. CYPHER inclined his head. A key. Not a king. No. For a moment, Guilliman looked not angry, but profoundly tired. Had any other spoken that to me, I might have named it insolence. You may still. I may. Guilliman studied him. But it would not make you wrong. The fleet reached Terra through fire. By then, millions were dead across the formation. 3 cruisers had been lost to warp Stormshear. 1 battleship translated inside its own escort screen and killed both vessels in a sun-bright detonation that scattered burning crewmen into the void by the tens of thousands. A troop carrier arrived with every mortal aboard, fused into a single screaming carpet of flesh spread across its decks. A frigate survived 3. Boarding actions only to be executed by Imperial guns when its astropaths began broadcasting in the voices of demons. Still, the fleet came on. Terra appeared at last, not as the cradle of mankind remembered in ancient dreams, but as a fortress world drowning beneath its own sanctity. It was armor, spire, gun, ash cloud, orbital plate, void shield, and prayer. Around it, warships hung in layers like blades around a dying god. The Imperial Palace sprawled across the horizon of the world below, vast beyond comprehension, a mountain range of walls and towers, a continent of war and worship built above the throne of the master of mankind. CYPHER stood alone before the viewing port as the fleet entered the throne world's shadow. Guilliman watched him from behind, saying nothing. In that stillness, the Primarch understood what had eluded lesser hunters for 10,000 years. CYPHER was not driven by chaos madness, not by simple guilt, not by faith in the Imperium, nor hatred clean enough to be called treason. Something older moved him, an oath from before the corpse cult, a mission born in forests that no longer existed, beneath a sky destroyed by brothers. CYPHER looked upon the Imperial Palace. The sheathed sword did not move. "At last," he said, "the tomb that calls itself a throne." The Imperial Palace did not rise from terror. It conquered it. Its walls consumed mountain ranges. Its towers stabbed through polluted cloud strata and vanished into smog lit from beneath by defense grids, shrine fires, and the dull red pulse of void shield generators. Its avenues were broad enough for armored divisions to roll 10 abreast beneath statues larger than hab blocks. Its gates were not entrances, but judgments. Each one had watched generations die before it. Each one had drunk enough blood to drown a lesser world. Robout Guilliman passed beneath them in silence. He came not as a petitioner, though the Imperium would have called him one. He came not as a pilgrim, though billions would have butchered their own kin for the right to crawl where his armored boots now fell. He came as a son returning to the bedchamber of a dying father, and every soul in the procession knew enough to fear what such a return might awaken. Custodians lined the approach in ranks of auramite and crimson, guardian spears grounded, helms turned forward. They did not kneel, they did not cheer, they did not raise hymns as the mortal hosts had done beyond the inner walls. The 10,000 had watched Primarchs before. They had watched them triumph, betray, bleed, and vanish. Awe had no place in their discipline. Behind Guilliman walked the Ultramarines, ordered, silent, every movement precise despite the wounds of the crusade. Behind them, beneath the watch of drawn blades and targeting spirits, came CYPHER and the Fallen. They had been permitted to enter the palace. That was not the same as being permitted to proceed. CYPHER felt the change before the command was spoken. The air altered. The custodes shifted by increments too small for mortal eyes, yet enough to close every road. Vox nets tightened. Servo skulls paused in their devotional circuits. Hidden weapons woke behind murder slits in the walls, their machine spirits purring with the hunger of sanctified violence. Haroth felt it too. His scarred face hardened beneath the hood of his robe. "Here," he muttered, "this is where courtesy dies." "Courtesy died long before terror," CYPHER said. Ahead, the Eternity Gate waited. It was vast beyond the vanity of architecture, a sealed horizon of gold, adamantium, and sculpted judgment. Angels, saints, warriors, martyrs, and monsters climbed its surface in relief, frozen in endless war beneath the gaze of the master of mankind. No mortal craft had made it alone. No single age could have conceived it. It was a barrier built not only to deny passage, but to make the soul understand that passage itself was presumption. Guilliman halted before it. For the first time since entering the palace, something in the Primarch's bearing changed. Not weakness, never that, but the terrible restraint of a son who must not tremble before his warriors, before the custodes, before the corpse cult empire wearing his father's bones as a crown. A custodian tribune stepped forward. His name was not offered. His spear remained lowered across the path of every warrior, except the Primarch. "The avenging sun may pass." Guilliman turned, his head slightly. "My honor guard comes with me." "No." The word was not defiance. It was law. Guilliman's gaze moved across the ranks of gold. "I am Robuta Guilliman, son of the Emperor, Lord of Ultramar, commander of this crusade." "And you may pass," the tribune said. "Alone." The Ultramarines stiffened. Armor joints murmured. Hands tightened around bolters and sword hilts. No weapon rose, but the possibility of violence entered the sanctified air like poison. Guilliman raised one hand. His sons obeyed. CYPHER watched him. The Primarch did not look back at the fallen. That too was a decision. Perhaps mercy, perhaps calculation, perhaps both. The gates opened. They did not swing wide. They parted just enough to admit one son into the presence of the father whose dream he had outlived. Golden light spilled through the seam. Not light, CYPHER thought. Pressure, will, agony given radiance. Guilliman entered. The eternity gate sealed behind him. The custodes moved at once. They came without shouted order and without haste, because haste belonged to men who feared arriving too late. Guardian spears leveled, suppression fields ignited, servo locks snapped from wall recesses. The Ultramarines were not targeted, not yet, but every fallen was surrounded within heartbeats. Haroth bared his teeth. So this is the honor of terror. A custodian struck him in the throat with the haft of a spear, hard enough to crack ceramite. Haroth staggered, but did not fall. His hand went toward his chainsword. CYPHER spoke softly. "Do not." Haroth froze, rage shaking through him. "Draw steel," the custodian said, "and die in the Emperor's house." One of the fallen laughed. Another whispered a Calibanite curse. A third reached for a sidearm and lost the hand before his fingers touched the grip. The custodian blade severed wrist and gauntlet in a single flash. Blood jetted across the polished floor. The fallen snarled, but CYPHER turned his hood toward him, and whatever he saw there stilled him more completely than the spears. CYPHER raised his hands. The gesture enraged Haroth more than the custodes did. "You surrender?" CYPHER said nothing. Adamantium restraints closed around his wrists. Null shackles locked over his armor with a hiss of awakened field generators. His pistols were removed, sealed inside stasis reliquaries by cherubim with corpse-pale hands. The sword was taken last, and the custodian who lifted it did so with both hands, as though instinct warned him weight had nothing to do with danger. Haroth spat blood onto the floor. "Why did you allow the chains?" CYPHER looked toward the sealed eternity gate. "Because every gate has two sides. A prisoner is already inside the wall." Haroth stared at him as though trying to decide whether to curse him, follow him, or kill him. Before he could do any of those things, the custodes took them below. Guilliman's audience with the Emperor had no witness among those left outside the gate. That did not mean it was unfelt. The palace changed around the moment. Every lumen seemed to dim in reverence or terror. Vox traffic across the inner precincts degraded into static, threaded with half-heard syllables. Astropaths in sealed choirs bit through restraints and convulsed until blood ran from their noses, ears, and blind eyes. Incense burners guttered. Cherubim wept oil. Ancient machine spirits paused in their endless labors, as if listening to a command too deep for circuits to translate. Beyond the gate, a mind opened. Not fully. Had it opened fully, terror would have become ash, and all human thought upon it would have been scoured clean by revelation. CYPHER felt only the edge. It still drove him to one knee. The Emperor's presence was not a voice, not to him. Not in any way a mortal tongue could name voice. It was pressure enough to flatten pride into atoms. It was golden agony. It was command without words, accusation without language, memory without mercy. It was a sun dying and refusing to go dark, because beyond its last light waited a universe of teeth. It was a father. It was a weapon. It was a corpse. It was a storm behind a sealed door, vast enough to crush planets and tired enough to envy the dead. CYPHER's shackles smoked. Haroth, chained beside him in the descent cage, gasped through clenched teeth. "What is that?" CYPHER closed his eyes. "The truth behind the lie. You have seen him?" "No." "Then how do you know?" CYPHER opened his eyes. "Because the throne sings like a prison." The descent continued. Down through the palace they went, beneath shrines, armories, sealed reliquaries and barracks, where warriors waited without knowing what they guarded. Down past gates older than the imperial creed. down through corridors where the walls bore kill scars from wars no history admitted had been fought. The custodes did not speak. The fallen did at first, until the weight of the dark cell's nearness took even defiance from their mouths. CYPHER understood then, with a certainty that tightened around both hearts. The Golden Throne was not one thing. It was life support, yes. It sustained the Emperor's ruined body. It fed the Astronomicon through the sacrifice of souls. It anchored the great work beneath the palace and held the impossible gate shut against the hunger beyond reality. The Imperium knew fragments of this, dressed them in incense and lore, and called ignorance reverence. But it was also a cage, not built as one perhaps, not intended as one. Intention had died with the age that made it. 10,000 years had turned function into torment and necessity into sacrament. It held the Emperor from death. It held him from healing. It held him from whatever terrible ascension might come if mankind stopped nailing its master to the machinery of survival. By the time the prisoners reached the dark cells, the Dark Angels had already begun to petition. Their requests came through sanctioned channels first, then unsanctioned ones, then channels that did not officially exist. The Unforgiven demanded custody of CYPHER under ancient chapter right, under authority of gene-line shame, under sealed crusade oaths older than the modern Inquisition. They named him renegade, they named him fallen, they named him contamination, whose continued existence within the palace was an insult to the lion and a danger to the throne. The custodes denied every request. The palace did not yield what it had taken. Asterion Valkus oversaw the confinement personally. He watched as CYPHER was chained beneath wards that could have held a demon prince in agony. He watched the sword sealed apart from its bearer. He watched the pistols locked inside stasis. His eyes, hidden behind auramite and red lenses, never left the hooded prisoner. "You wish to enter the wall," Valkus said. CYPHER did not answer. "Now you are beneath it." "Yes." "You find this victory?" "No." "Defeat?" "No." "What then?" CYPHER lifted his head. "Proximity." Valkus regarded him in silence for a long moment. "You are either very patient," the custodian said, "or very damned." CYPHER's chains creaked as he settled into the restraints. "Those are not opposites." Above them, Interrogator Chaplain Mordain Barakiel arrived on Terra under oaths that named other purposes. His strike force did not come openly as a hunt. The manifests spoke of penitent reinforcement detachments, honor guard rotation, relic escort, and void security consultation. Ravenwing assets entered the outer defense networks under transponder veils and false deployment orders. Deathwing terminators were quartered in sealed chapels, with no mortal attendants permitted to approach. Serfs who asked questions were reassigned. Officers who noticed irregularities were visited by chaplains and remembered less afterward. Barakiel stood in a private reliquary beneath a statue of the lion and listened to the final denial from the custodes. His skull helm rested on the altar before him. Without it, his face was lined by old hatred and the burden of sacred secrecy. He had hunted CYPHER across worlds. He had watched brothers die beneath collapsing cathedrals. He had heard witnesses call the fallen savior, angel, saint, ghost, and curse. Every title had been an obscenity. A robed dark angel knelt behind him. "The custodes refuse us again, Lord." Barakiel closed one gauntlet around the haft of his Crozius. Then they placed themselves between the lion's sons and repentance. The inner circle counsels patience. The inner circle is not standing beneath terror while our shame breathes in the Emperor's shadow. He donned his skull helm. Red lenses flared. "Prepare the brethren. No blade drawn unless necessity demands it. No record, no witness, no failure." Far. From the Dark Angels, in a chamber with no heraldry and no windows, the Officio Assassinorum received its own sanction. The order passed between men who would never meet, and machines that erased each trace of obedience as soon as obedience was rendered. A Vindicare operative was awakened from chemical stillness. A Colexus was drawn from a null vault, its handlers bleeding from the nose merely by standing too close. A Kalidas identity chain was prepared and then sealed away when palace access became too unstable for infiltration. The command was simple, though nothing about its target was. If CYPHER's captivity risked palace security, he was to be eliminated. No trial, no warning, no relic recovery unless possible, no hesitation. The throne world tightened around one prisoner. Then the Astronomicon died. Not forever, not yet, but for the span of horror that men would later name the Noctis Eterna. Its light vanished from the souls of humanity, like a god inhaling before a scream. Terror felt it. Every astropathic choir ruptured into madness. Navigators collapsed in their towers. Pilgrims fell by the million, clutching at their chests, as if the light had been a physical organ torn from within them. The sky above the palace turned red, not with sunset, but with the reflection of a wound spreading across the galaxy. Vox nets drowned in prayer, static and demonic laughter. Bells rang without hands, statues cracked, blood ran uphill along the steps of certain shrines. Beneath the palace, the dark cells answered. Wards flickered, null fields screamed. Locks older than the ecclesiarchy opened under impossible pressure. In his chains, CYPHER smiled. Terror's sky was the color of opened meat. The void shields above the imperial palace screamed beneath the pressure of the impossible. They did not fail. They had been raised by minds that had thought in continents, by artisans who measured architecture in geological ages, by the will of an empire that would rather spend worlds than admit vulnerability. Yet they screamed all the same, vast hemispheres of force shuddering under the impact of demonic wrath. Their light rippled crimson and gold over the mountains of gunmetal and sanctified stone, over the towers, bastions, processional avenues and fortress walls of the palace, over the millions of mortals pressed into trenches, gun platforms and shrine barricades beneath a heaven that had become a wound. Artillery answered. The palace batteries fired until their barrels glowed white, and the air around them boiled. Macro cannon hurled shells the size of hab blocks into tides of brass, horn, and hatred. Defense lasers speared the red sky and burned holes through things that had never truly been alive. Missile storms climbed on pillars of smoke, burst in incandescent flowers, and turned ranks of demons into sprays of black ichor, red flame, and shattered bone. For every creature destroyed, more came shrieking through the torn veil. Bloodletters burst apart under detonations, reformed in storms of gore and laughter, and charged again with brass blades raised toward the walls of mankind's last sanctum. The hosts of Khorne did not advance as an army of flesh and discipline. They came as hunger with weapons. They came howling across killing fields already ankle-deep in blood, bounding over tank traps, razor wire, and the mounds of the dead. Juggernauts thundered through shellfire, their iron hides sparking beneath Lascanon strikes, their hooves crushing men into red paste. Flesh hounds leapt into trenches and dragged screaming defenders out by the throat, shaking bodies until spines snapped and heads tore free in fountains of arterial spray. Bloodletters swarmed over barricades, chopping with blackened blades that split helmets, torsos, and souls with equal contempt. Where they died laughing. Where they killed, they roared the name of their god until mortal minds cracked under the sound. The defenders of terror did not break. They died in place. Astra Militarum regiments fired until lasguns overheated and charge packs burst in their hands. Naval armsmen stood shoulder to shoulder with palace levies, shrine militia, penal cohorts, and gun servitors welded into defense nests. Men who had never seen an open sky before were trampled beneath demonic hooves on the steps of temples they had been told were eternal. Priests raised icons and were cut in half, their sermons becoming wet coughs as their intestines spilled down the stairs. Commissars shot the fleeing until the fleeing had nowhere left to run, then turned their pistols toward the demons and vanished beneath red blades. Amid that mortal ruin moved the Adeptus Custodes. They fought like statues of judgment that had tired of waiting to be worshipped. No roar came from them, no chant, no prayer. Their silence was more terrible than fury. Guardian spears rose and fell with exacting grace, each movement economical, each death already decided before it occurred. A custodian stepped through a spray of blood as a demon's blade cut 3 mortal defenders apart beside him. His spear pierced the demon's throat, reversed, and split the skull of another behind it. A third leapt for his back and died with its chest opened from hip to shoulder, black organs unraveling across auramite that did not slow. Around each golden warrior, mortals died by the thousands, crushed, carved, burned and devoured. But the custodians did not falter. They were not there to save every life. They were there to prevent the final death. Beneath the war, the dark cells had opened like a grave, forgetting its occupant. CYPHER moved through maintenance arteries beneath the palace with 3 fallen at his back. Their chains were gone. Their weapons had been reclaimed. His bolt pistol and plasma pistol rested in his hands, and the sheathed sword lay across his back beneath the ragged white of his robe. The tunnels shuddered with every strike from above. Dust fell in grey sheets from the ceiling. Warning runes pulsed along the walls, shifting from red to black to dead, as ancient systems died and woke and died again. Haroth walked closest, bleeding from fresh cuts where he had torn free of restraints. His armor was cracked along the ribs, his face pale beneath old scars and new rage. The other 2 fallen, Kerith and Malvoch, moved without speech, helms sealed, bolters raised. They had been knights once. They had been legionaries once. Now they were ghosts, walking beneath the palace of a corpse they had helped enthrone through failure, pride, and 10,000 years of silence. The passages stank of hot metal, sacred oil, ruptured sewage, and human panic. They crossed reliquary tunnels where glass-fronted alcoves held bones of saints, each bone tagged, named and venerated by clerks who would never know the bones had belonged to men who would have despised the worship. They passed through a pilgrim artery where thousands had forced their way below when the sky turned red. The panic had killed them before the demons did. Bodies lay crushed so densely that the fallen had to climb over them. Old men flattened beneath mobs, children shaped bundles under devotional cloaks, servitors overturned and still twitching, their tool limbs carving grooves through dead faces. A priest hung from a pipe by his own rosarius chain, mouth open, tongue black, eyes burst from pressure and terror. Something laughed in the dark ahead. Haroth raised his chainsword. Demons! CYPHER stopped. The laughter vanished. The air died. It was not silence. Silence still belonged to the world. This was absence. The tunnel's machine hum faded. The distant thunder of artillery became remote and wrong, as if heard from beneath deep water. The pressure of the warp recoiled. The blood on the floor stopped steaming. The shadows sharpened. Kerith made a strangled sound and clutched at his helm as though trying to hold his soul inside his skull. CYPHER turned slowly. A figure stood at the far end of the corpse passage. It was thin, black-armored, and wrong in a way no demon could imitate. Its skull helm was smooth and dreadful, its animus speculum closed like the eye of a dead god. Around it, reality felt spiritually murdered. The dead seemed deader. The living felt less certain they had ever possessed souls. The fallen felt it through gene-wrought flesh and ancient hatred, a guttering emptiness that made their hearts labor and their thoughts scrape against themselves. A Culexus assassin had found them. Malvoch whispered an oath that ended as a wet cough. Blood ran from beneath his helm seal. The Culexus lifted its head. CYPHER fired first. The bolt round crossed the tunnel and curved away, as if meaning itself had lost interest in impact. It struck the wall beside the assassin and detonated, showering the passage in stone chips and corpse fragments. The Colexus advanced without haste. "Move," CYPHER said. They ran. Behind them, the assassin followed, and the emptiness came with it. Demons recoiled from that presence in the passages ahead. A pack of lesser warp things burst through a maintenance hatch, snarling, claws slick with mortal blood, only to shriek and tear at their own faces when the Colexus's aura reached them. CYPHER and the Fallen cut through the stunned creatures. Haroth's chainsword opened one from throat to groin, spilling black coils of intestine and burning vapor. CYPHER shot another twice in the face, bolt shells bursting its skull into wet petals against the wall. Kerith kicked a twitching body aside and vomited inside his helm as the assassin's null presence scraped over him from behind. They reached a lift shaft whose platform had died floors above. CYPHER did not slow. He leapt into the shaft, mag boots striking the wall, cloak snapping in the stale air. The Fallen followed, descending by service rungs, broken cables, and armored momentum. Above, the Colexus appeared at the lip and looked down, black and silent against the red emergency light. Haroth laughed, despite the blood running from his mouth. "Even demons fear that thing." "Everything fears what proves it can be absent," CYPHER said. "Do you?" CYPHER landed on the lower platform in a crouch. "No." "Liar." "Yes." They forced open the lift doors into war. The passage beyond had become a tributary of the battle raging above. Demons had broken through from a shrine plaza into the underworks, and mortal defenders were dying in heaps beneath a vaulted transit chapel lined with shattered statues. Heavy bolters barked from behind sandbag walls. Flamers washed the entrance in promethium. Men screamed as burning demons crashed into them and exploded into showers of ichor and fire. The floor was a slurry of blood, fat, spent shells and torn limbs. Boots slipped on intestines. Bayonets snapped against brass blades. A gun servitor continued firing after its lower half had been severed, its augmetic spine dragging sparks through the gore. CYPHER saw the route beyond the chapel. He also saw the demon host between him and it. Haroth saw it too. "No," CYPHER said. Haroth grinned at him, teeth red. "You did not hear my proposal?" "I know it." "Then you know it is sound." "It is waste." Haroth revved his chainsword. "We were waste the day the lion returned." Kerith and Malvok moved to flank him, but Haroth shoved them back. "Take him through." CYPHER's hood turned toward him. For a moment, the old knight of Caliban looked almost young beneath the blood and grime. Not innocent. None of them had ever been that. But clear. "Go, CYPHER." The demons hit. Haroth met them laughing. His chainsword screamed into a bloodletter's neck and tore the head free in a fountain of black arterial filth. A brass blade punched through his side. He trapped the demon's wrist against his ribs and shot it point blank through the face until the skull came apart. Another leapt onto his back, claws digging into armor seams, tearing plates away. Haroth slammed backward into a pillar hard enough to crack stone, crushing the creature between ceramite and masonry, then staggered forward with his back slick and open. CYPHER led Kerith and Malvok through the edge of the melee, pistols speaking without pause. Plasma turned a demon's torso into molten ruin. Bolt shells detonated under jaws, inside throats, through exposed hearts that beat with furnace light. The mortal defenders saw the robed warrior and the dark-armored giants cutting a path through hell and began to chant, not knowing whether they praised saints, traitors, or their own damnation. Haroth was still laughing when the greater demon shape found him. It towered above the lesser host, horned and red, its axe larger than a sentinel walker, its body corded with muscle and rage. It struck once. Haroth avoided death by a handspan and lost his left arm from shoulder to wrist in a single wet burst. He did not fall. He drove his chainsword into the creature's thigh, teeth chewing through immortal flesh. The demon roared, seized him with one claw, and tore him open. Haroth's breastplate split, ribs snapped outward. His hearts burst in red pulses across the demon's fist. The creature pulled him apart with obscene strength, spilling transhuman organs down its wrist. Haroth spat blood into its face and laughed harder. "Caliban burns," he gasped, seeing not terror, but memory. At last. The demon crushed what remained of him. CYPHER did not turn back. That was mercy. That was cruelty. That was survival. He reached the Cathedral of Shattered Saints with Kerith and Malvok, seconds before the Deathwing entered from the far transept. The chamber had once been a subterranean cathedral for pilgrims too lowly to ever see the higher shrines. Its statues had been carved from pale stone and gilded in cheap gold leaf. Now they lay broken in drifts of dust and blood. Sainted heads the size of tanks stared sideways from the floor. Stone hands reached upward from rubble, as if begging for extraction. Demons and mortals had died there in such numbers that the air was warm with the steam of opened bodies. Interrogator Chaplain Mordain Barakiel stood atop a fallen statue's chest. Deathwing Terminators advanced beside him through walls of gore and smoke, bone armor scarred by demon blades, storm shields raised, maces and assault cannons ready. They did not look toward the breach where demons still poured into the eastern aisle. They did not acknowledge the mortal defenders being butchered near the altar. Their red lenses were fixed on CYPHER. Barakiel raised his Crozius. "Repent." CYPHER stood amid the dead, pistols lowered. "I have. That is why you hate me." The chaplain descended from the statue, each step grinding sainted stone into powder. "You profane that word. You imprisoned it. You murdered brothers. So did you. You betrayed the lion. The lion needed no help being betrayed. We all came to that work with willing hands." Barakiel's Crozius flared. "Enough." The Deathwing advanced. CYPHER moved at last, not backward but aside, firing into the ceiling supports above the eastern aisle. Kerith and Malvok opened fire on the demons, not the Dark Angels. Bolt rounds tore into the warp host. Demons roared and turned toward the new pane. A support arch cracked. Stone and iron crashed down, blocking one route and forcing the demonic tide toward the Deathwing flank. Barakiel saw it too late. The bloodletters hit the Deathwing line in a frenzy of brass and hate. Terminators met them without changing pace. Storm shields smashed demons aside. Maces crushed skulls into black spray. Assault cannons filled the aisle with explosive fire, chewing demons apart in storms of meat and bone. But the impact broke the clean line of pursuit. The unforgiven were forced to fight for terror, while believing themselves still hunting shame. CYPHER crossed the cathedral through the storm he had made. A bloodletter lunged for him. Barakiel's Crozius crushed its skull before it reached him. The chaplain and CYPHER faced one another for a heartbeat across the corpse of the demon. "You cannot run forever," Barakiel said. "I am not running." "Then what are you doing?" CYPHER looked toward the sealed passage beyond the cathedral, where old processional doors waited beneath sigils of pre-imperial make. "Arriving?" Malvosh died opening the way, cut down by Deathwing fire meant for CYPHER. Kerith fell beneath demon blades, dragging two of the creatures down with him, his last words lost under bolter thunder. CYPHER passed through the doors alone as the cathedral vanished behind smoke, blood, roaring demons, and the wrath of the Dark Angels. The sealed procession route beyond was untouched by the war. Its silence felt obscene. Black marble stretched ahead beneath golden lumen strips. The walls bore reliefs of old victories, old oaths, old lies. The air was colder here, cleaner, heavy with incense and the pressure of proximity. Somewhere beyond these corridors lay the inner sanctum, the throne's outer mysteries, the last roads a man could walk before entering the domain of the master of mankind. CYPHER took 3 steps. A guardian spear lowered across his path. Shield Captain Asterion Valkus stood in the center of the route, Auramite armor burning in the red light leaking from distant war. His cloak hung torn at one edge. His spear blade hummed with restrained power. Blood marked his armor, most of it not his own. Behind CYPHER, the cathedral thundered with death. Ahead, the custodian did not move. "You will go no further," Valkus said. "You will go no further," Valkus said. The words filled the procession route without echo. They needed none. The custodian stood beneath the long gaze of carved saints, beneath reliefs of wars whose names had been cut from authorized history, beneath a ceiling of black marble veined with gold. Behind CYPHER, the cathedral of shattered saints still thundered with bolter fire, demonic howls, and the wrath of the unforgiven. Ahead, the sealed route bent toward the inner sanctum, toward wards that had endured since the Emperor walked terror with living breath in his lungs. CYPHER did not raise his pistols. His robe hung in burned tatters over ancient armor. Blood had stiffened the cloth in black layers. Some was his, much was not. The sheathed sword lay across his back, silent and heavier than accusation. His bolt pistol rested low in his right hand, the plasma pistol in his left. Their muzzles pointed at the floor. Valkus's guardian spear remained level with CYPHER's chest. The shield captain bore marks of the invasion. His auramite plate was scorched across the breast and scored along one pauldron by a blade that had not been forged in reality. His crimson cloak was torn and darkened at the hem. Black demon blood steamed in the joints of his armor, burning away as the plate's field harmonics rejected the filth. He stood as he had stood in the dark cells, without wrath, without haste, without sermon. Loyalty did not burn in him as it burned in priests. It did not froth like zeal in the mouths of mortals. It was older than worship, older than the ecclesiarchy, older than the imperial lies raised over the bones of the emperor's dream. CYPHER looked at the spear. "You are wounded. Insufficiently. Others require you more than I do. The palace requires obedience. The palace is drowning in demons. The palace has endured worse than demons." CYPHER's hood tilted slightly. Yes, it endured men. Valkus did not react. From far behind them came the roar of a collapsing arch and the wet detonation of bodies caught beneath stone. The Deathwing had met the demonic tide fully now. Storm bolters hammered. Brass blades screamed against shields. Mortals died in the dark between demigods who did not know their names. Valkus said, "You will not pass." CYPHER answered, "That has been the Imperium's answer to every cure." The Guardian spear moved. To mortal sight, the battle would have been nothing but flashes. Gold, green, white, red, the blur of a blade, the crack of pistols, the hiss of displaced air, the scream of power fields grazing ceramite by a handspan. Valkus crossed the distance in a single controlled burst of motion, spear thrusting for CYPHER's primary heart. CYPHER turned aside, not fully evading, but denying the kill. The blade tore through his robe and scored his breastplate, sparks exploding from the wound. His bolt pistol fired from below. Valkus angled his vambrace, and the shell detonated against auramite, bursting into fragments that would have shredded a mortal squad. The custodian did not slow. The spear reversed, haft striking for CYPHER's skull with bone-breaking precision. CYPHER ducked beneath it and fired the plasma pistol. Blue-white light filled the corridor. Valkus twisted, letting the shot pass close enough to scorch the gold from his shoulder guard. The blast struck the wall behind him and melted a saint's carved face into a weeping smear of molten stone. CYPHER stepped in, impossible for an Astartes carrying so much age and damage, and drove the muzzle of his bolt pistol toward the seam beneath Valkus's gorget. He did not fire. Valkus struck him in the ribs with the spear haft. Ceramite cracked. CYPHER hit the wall hard enough to fracture marble. Blood burst from his mouth inside the shadow of his hood. Valkus advanced without triumph. His spear came down for the fallen's throat. CYPHER rolled, fired twice, and shattered the floor beneath the custodian's leading foot. The first bolt cracked the marble. The second detonated under it, blasting shards upward. Valkus adjusted mid-step, balance perfect, but the fraction of resistance slowed him enough for CYPHER to rise. The plasma pistol came up again. For a heartbeat, Valkus's helm was exposed. CYPHER saw the line. He saw the shot. He saw the superheated bolt pass through the eye lens, vaporize the brain behind it, and leave the Emperor's Guardian collapsing in a ruin of auramite and cooked flesh. He lowered the muzzle by a finger's width. The plasma shot took Valkus in the left pauldron instead. Auramite flared, blackened, and ran in a molten sheet. The custodian staggered half a step only. His spear punched forward and opened CYPHER's side from hip to ribs. Blood splashed across the floor, dark and thick, steaming where it hit the power field's afterglow. Valkus halted the killing stroke before it landed. "You had me." CYPHER pressed one hand to the wound. "Yes?" "You missed by choice." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I did not come here to murder Guardians." "You came to reach the throne." "Yes." "With weapons." CYPHER's breath rasped. "So did every son who ever returned to his father." Valkus advanced again. Their second exchange was closer and uglier. CYPHER's pistols barked in confined thunder, each report hammering against the sanctified walls. Valkus moved through the fire with awful precision, deflecting what he could, absorbing what he must, never wasting movement in display. His spear slashed CYPHER's forearm, cut through robe and plate, and drew blood in a bright line. CYPHER answered with a bolt round into the custodian's thigh joint. It detonated against the outer armor, not through it, but the blast staggered Valkus enough for CYPHER to step inside the reach of the spear. His plasma pistol touched Valkus's chest plate. Again, he did not fire. Valkus headbutted him. The impact cracked CYPHER's helm beneath the hood and drove him backward. His vision flared white. Warning runes crawled across his retinal display and died. The custodian's spear came for his abdomen, not a killing thrust, but one meant to pin him to the wall like an insect beneath glass. A shot sounded without sound. It arrived before the report. Kerith's head exploded. The fallen had emerged from the cathedral behind them, or what remained of him had. His armor was split open across the torso. One arm hung useless, flayed to the bone in places where demon claws had found the seals. He had dragged himself through smoke and ruin, still carrying a bolter with 3 rounds in its magazine, still alive by hatred, genecraft, and the refusal to die before the road ended. The Vindicare round punched through his helm from the left side and turned the inside into red vapor. The skull burst outward beneath ceramite. Blood, brain matter, and fragments of blackened bone sprayed across the wall before anyone heard the distant crack. His body remained standing for a heartbeat, fingers tightening on the bolter's grip, then collapsed onto one knee and pitched forward. The weapon clattered from his dead hand. CYPHER did not look away from Valkus. Valkus did not look away from CYPHER. Both understood the lesson. The Officio Assassinorum had joined the chamber. Somewhere far beyond the visible corridor, through a firing slit no unaugmented eye could have found, a Vindicare assassin had marked every breath. Valkus said, "The palace tires of risk." CYPHER looked at Kerith's corpse. "The palace has always spent others to preserve itself. The palace preserves mankind." "Does it?" The answer came from the cathedral doors as they burst inward beneath a blow of black iron. Mordain Barakiel entered like a curse that had refused death. His armor was ruined. One side of his skull helm had been torn open, revealing a blood-slicked cheek and one furious eye beneath cracked lenses. His Crozius Arcanum dragged along the floor, its haft bent, its winged head broken in half, yet still spitting caged lightning. One of his pauldrons was gone. The arm beneath hung in tatters of ceramite and exposed fiber bundles. He walked through smoke and falling dust, every step leaving blood behind him. Behind him came the last echoes of the battle he had crossed. Deathwing Terminators still fought in the cathedral, their storm shields locked against demon fury. Brass blades rang against bone-white plate. Assault cannons chewed monsters into red ruin, but Barakiel had left them. Shame mattered more than survival. The hunt mattered more than the invasion. Such was the way of the unforgiven. Such was the oldest rot in their loyalty. CYPHER, Barakiel rasped. The name came through his damaged vox as static and hatred. CYPHER turned slightly. Mordain. The chaplain raised the broken Crozius. You planned this. The breach, the cells, the deaths, all to crawl toward him with that blade. Valkus shifted his spear, so both warriors stood within his reach. Barakiel ignored him. You will murder the Emperor and damn mankind. CYPHER's answer was soft. Mankind is already damned. The question is whether damnation must remain policy. Blasphemy. You use the word as a wall because you fear what stands behind it. Barakiel took another step. I fear nothing you carry. Then why have your kind chased it for 10,000 years? The chaplain's Crozius flared in answer. CYPHER looked from him to Valkus. Listen then, both of you, not as priest, not as jailer. Listen as warriors who have watched the Imperium rot and called the stench incense because the alternative was despair. Valkus did not lower his spear. Barakiel did not strike. The distant Vindicar did not fire. CYPHER spoke into the trembling air. The Emperor's body lives because the throne will not allow it to die. His soul burns because mankind pours itself into the fire and calls the light navigation. His will holds the gates shut because the thing beneath this palace remains a wound in reality. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has mistaken endurance for victory. It has fed him psychers, faith, war, worship, fear, and the souls of the desperate. It has wrapped the machinery of agony in gold and named the scream divine. Barakiel's voice became a growl. Blasphemy, Valkus said. Speculation. CYPHER's hood turned toward the custodian. No, it is the only explanation that makes 10,000 years of suffering make sense. Valkus stood motionless. CYPHER continued. What if he cannot heal because the throne sustains the wound? What if he cannot ascend because the machine anchors him to a corpse? What if he cannot die because mankind is too terrified to release him, and cannot return because his own prison is worshipped by the species that needs him most? Barakiel took a step, as if physically struck. You dare speak of releasing him? I dare speak of the chain. You mean to kill him. I mean to cut what binds him to slow death. That is murder. Perhaps. That is treason. Certainly. That is damnation. CYPHER's hand moved, not to his pistol, but to the strap across his chest that held the sheathed blade. Perhaps salvation has always worn the face of a crime. The corridor convulsed. It was not an explosion. It was not a weapon. It came from beyond the walls, beyond the palace, beyond the red sky and the demonic war drowning terror in blood. For a heartbeat, the failing Astronomicon, the wounded throne, the open warp, and the presence of the sheathed sword aligned like blades around a single thought. Everyone present saw, not with eyes. Eyes would have burst. They saw mankind if the Emperor failed. They saw terror crack like a skull beneath the pressure of the warp. They saw the Imperial Palace split from foundation to spire, its sanctums vomiting golden fire and black shadow. They saw the Astronomicon gutter out forever, and with it the last road between human worlds. They saw navigators die screaming in their towers as ships translated into madness and never returned. They saw hive worlds starve in darkness, agri worlds burn in isolation, forge worlds pray to machines that answered with scrap code laughter. They saw shrine worlds become feeding pits, where saints' bones crawled with flies, and choirs sang through slit throats. They saw every human soul become a doorway. Children in Hab cradles opened their mouths, and demons crawled out wearing their skins. Guardsmen on distant fronts turned their lasguns upon their own faces, as horns burst through their eyes. Astropaths became screaming gates, their bodies splitting open into red corridors through which armies marched. Corpse starch vats became wombs for things with too many hands. Imperial saints rose from reliquaries as puppets of thirsting gods. Every prayer became an invitation. Every fear became a key. Every act of worship became a hook in the flesh of reality. They saw the Emperor's light vanish. They saw what waited without it. Barakiel fell to one knee, Crozius scraping sparks from the floor. Blood poured from his exposed eye. Valkus remained standing, but his spear trembled by the smallest measure. CYPHER leaned against the wall, teeth clenched, old wounds opening beneath his armor, as if the vision had flayed him from within. The moment ended. The corridor returned. Far away, the Vindicare fired again. Valkus moved before the shot arrived. His spear snapped upward, and the round struck its power field, detonating in a flare of force that tore a chunk from the wall and filled the air with stone dust. The custodian did not look toward the assassin's nest. "Enough," he said. CYPHER stepped toward the final ward. Valkus raised the spear again, but more slowly now. Barakiel struggled upright. "Stop him!" CYPHER reached the sealed arch at the end of the procession route. It was not grand. That made it worse. A simple black gate, no taller than a dreadnought, inscribed with circuitry, oath script and command locks, from an age before the Imperial Creed had learned to crawl. No Aquila marked it. No saint watched over it. It belonged to older wars, older necessities. Valkus's voice was low. No fallen should know that door. CYPHER placed his bloodied palm against the central seal. "I was not always fallen." The gate examined him. Machines beneath the wall woke with the reluctance of buried giants. Red runes flickered. Gold lines crawled across the arch. A tone sounded, deep enough to make Barakiel's cracked armor vibrate. CYPHER spoke a phrase in a language neither High Gothic nor Calibanite, a command code from the Emperor's own war beneath Terra, from the age when the Master of Mankind had fought in tunnels and laboratories for the future he would never live to see fulfilled. The words were not prayer, they were authority. The final ward opened. The opened ward did not reveal the throne. It revealed proximity. That was worse. CYPHER stepped through the black gate and entered a passage where reality had been wounded for longer than most empires had existed. The air resisted him. It pressed against his armor, his robes, his skin, his bones, his hearts. It did not feel like atmosphere. It felt like will. Every breath scraped down his throat with the taste of hot gold, old dust, burned offerings, corpse wax and lightning sealed inside metal. The lumen strips overhead bent toward him, then away, unable to decide whether light should obey physics in this place. The walls sweated sparks. Machine conduits twitched like veins beneath stone. He was not in the throne room. No unbidden man entered that sanctum and remained merely himself. No traitor son, no lost knight, no bearer of forbidden truth could simply walk into the full sight of the Master of Mankind and continue to exist as a question. The inner seals still lay ahead, layered in adamantium, oathcraft, machine logic, and psychic law. Yet even here, in the outer presence, the golden throne was already everywhere. It was in the floor beneath his boots. It was in the trembling air. It was in the static crawling across his helm display. It was in the blood that seeped from the wound in his side and refused to fall straight, curving instead toward the sealed inner doors, as if drawn by a gravity deeper than mass. CYPHER walked. Each step cost him more than battle had, more than chains, more than the demons at the Lion's Gate. His armor system stuttered, failed, revived, and screamed contradictory warnings across dead retinal feeds. His plasma pistol's containment field whimpered in its housing. His bolt pistol clicked through half a loading right without his touch. The machine spirits knew where they were. Even weapons had souls, and their souls understood fear in the presence of the soul that had once commanded all mankind to kneel to reason. Now reason burned as incense. The corridor widened into an antechamber of black stone and gold circuitry. a place built not for worship, but for maintenance, containment, and war. Later ages had defiled it with reverence. Candles burned in alcoves where diagnostic shrines had once stood. Skulls hung on silver chains over access panels whose functions had been forgotten. Prayer strips covered warning sigils. Incense clogged ventilation grills. Men had looked upon the bones of ancient necessity and dressed them as holiness because ignorance wanted robes. Mortal machines wept sparks around him. A servitor fused into a wall alcove turned its head as he passed. Its eyes had long ago been replaced by crystal lenses clouded with age, yet blood ran from them now, thin red lines over grey flesh. Its mouth opened. No words emerged, only static, then a sound like a child choking. Then silence as its cranial augmetics burst in a shower of fire and bone fragments. A logic engine nearby began to chant Binharic code at impossible speed. Its casing split. Gears vomited from its side. Its spirit died screaming through every vox grill in the chamber. CYPHER kept walking. The sword burned against his back. Not with heat. Heat was a mortal kindness. This was recognition. The sheathed blade had slept through wars, hunts, betrayals, and centuries of ash. It had endured demonic rites, dark angels' pursuit, custodian chains, and the madness of the warp without answering. Now, before the outer shadow of the throne, it woke enough to hurt. His hands trembled. For the first time in 10,000 years, CYPHER hated them for it. The pressure increased. The Emperor did not speak. A voice would have been lesser. A sentence would have been insult. The presence beyond the sealed doors reached into the chamber without motion and filled it with command, fire, accusation, memory, and impossible grief. CYPHER felt himself seen by something too vast for sight, judged by something too wounded for mercy, remembered by something that had forgotten nothing, even as mankind forgot everything. He saw Caliban. The black forests rose around him, wet with rain and beast blood. Young knights knelt in mud, their faces pale with fear they had not yet learned to hide. The fortress of Aldoruk stood against the trees, ugly and honest and doomed. Luther smiled beside him, warmth wrapped around a wound. The lion stood apart, beautiful as a drawn blade, and just as easy to love from a distance. The forest remembered. The dead remembered. The vision broke. He saw the fall. Aldoruk burning, statues exploding, banners becoming smoke, brothers in the same colors killing one another beneath cracking vaults. Luther crowned in shadow, the lion descending like judgment, Caliban splitting under orbital fire and warp rupture, Astartes hurled screaming into time, the sword in his hands, still sheathed, while his home became absence. The vision broke. He saw Guilliman, the avenging sun standing before the corpse empire with exhaustion behind his noble eyes. A primarch of reason forced to command a civilization that had made an altar of decay. He saw Guilliman's horror when the priests called the emperor divine. He saw the calculation that followed, colder and more necessary than disgust. He saw a son forced to use the lie because tearing it away would kill more worlds than any honesty could save. The vision broke. He saw Horus, not as the Imperium remembered him, not as sermons painted him, all monstrous pride and inevitable damnation. He saw a son beloved, broken open by ambition, wounded by truth, filled with gods who laughed through his mouth. He saw the War Master's last instant, the Emperor's grief sharpened into annihilation, father killing son and losing more than flesh in the act. He saw the wound that had never closed, because mankind had built its empire inside it. The vision broke. He saw terror before empire, blue sky, open water, cities not yet crushed beneath continent walls, men arguing beneath sunlight, not kneeling beneath statues, armies killing one another with primitive fury, ignorant that their descendants would raise war to sacrament. The emperor walked among them unseen, already burdened, already planning salvation with hands that would one day be mistaken for divine. The vision broke. He saw mankind before it learned to worship its own wounds. He saw hunger, invention, cruelty, tenderness, revolt, murder, courage, cowardice, laughter beside fire, blood on stone, ships rising into the void, men looking upward without prayer. He saw the species as it had been before the long dark, before the age of strife, before gene war and alien predation and the predatory hungers of the warp. Weak, brilliant, vile, magnificent, worth saving perhaps, and therefore damned to be used by every power that claimed to save it. CYPHER staggered. Behind him, the gate thundered open. Valkus entered first. The shield captain forced his way into the antechamber as if advancing through a storm of blades. His auramite armor shone too brightly in the golden pressure, every engraved line and battle scar burning with reflected will. His spear was raised, but its tip trembled by a measure so slight only an Astartes could have seen it. Blood ran from beneath his helm, not from a wound of flesh perhaps, but from proximity to the thing he guarded and would never understand as anything but duty. Behind him came Barakiel. The interrogator chaplain stumbled through the psychic storm, with one hand dragging his broken Crozius, and the other pressed against his helm, as if he could hold the truth out by force. His armor cracked further with every step. Purity seals burned black. The skull face of his helm split along one cheek, exposing one human eye wide with rage, terror, and denial. The throne's presence touched them both. Valkus saw 10,000 years of watchfulness. He saw custodians standing beside closed doors, while sons betrayed fathers, and fathers became machines. He saw golden warriors who had never fled a battlefield, and yet had failed to prevent the Emperor's fall. He saw loyalty refined until it had no room left for hope. He saw himself, not as a hero, not as a saint, but as one more lock upon a cage that might also be a fortress. For a heartbeat, the question entered him. What if guarding him and freeing him were not the same thing? Valkus almost fell. He did not. Barakiel saw the rock. He saw interrogation cells where fallen screamed beneath blades and chains. He saw confessions extracted, doubted, recorded, sealed and buried. He saw brothers lying to brothers with sacred precision. He saw worlds abandoned because a rumor of the fallen had appeared elsewhere. He saw the lion not as a father watching over them, but as absence, and in that absence the unforgiven had built a religion of shame. He saw himself kneeling before prisoners, demanding repentance, while never daring to ask what his own chapter should repent. He roared and staggered forward. CYPHER! The name cracked through the chamber and died against the golden pressure. CYPHER stood before the last sealed doors. He did not turn. Valkus raised his spear. Step away. Barakiel lifted the broken Crozius. End this. CYPHER looked at the doors, at the gold circuitry crawling across them like veins of captured sunlight, at the locks older than most human religions, at the faint radiance leaking through the seams. Beyond them was not merely the Emperor. Beyond them was the lie that allowed the species to continue, the wound that lit the stars, the corpse that commanded fleets, the god that had denied godhood until denial became irrelevant. CYPHER spoke not to Valkus, nor to Barakiel. He spoke to the presence beyond. I came to kill what keeps you dead. I came to revive what mankind buried beneath gold. The chamber shook, not from wrath, from answer. The sheathed sword ignited against his back. CYPHER reached over his shoulder. Valkus lunged. The psychic pressure drove him to one knee before he crossed half the chamber. His spear struck the floor, cutting through black stone and releasing a fan of sparks. Barakiel tried to charge and screamed as every oath he had ever sworn wrapped around his throat and tightened. His Crozius fell from his hand. He dropped beside it, clawing at the floor, hatred refusing to die even when his body could not obey it. CYPHER's fingers closed around the hilt. The blade began to leave the scabbard. A sound rolled through the imperial palace. It was not a bell. It was not a siren. It was not a voice. It was the sound of every hidden system beneath the throne world, remembering fear at once. Wards flared from the dark cells to the Eternity Gate. Servo skulls burst in mid-air by the thousands. Astropaths already half dead from the Noctis, Eterna arched in their thrones and screamed blood across their handlers. Custodians across the inner precincts turned toward the throne as one. Tech priests fell to their knees, mechadendrites thrashing, Binharic prayers degrading into static sobs. The palace reacted as though a second sun was rising beneath it. Across Terra, demons screamed, not in triumph, in terror. Blood letters froze amid slaughter, their brass blades lowered as if some deeper predator had entered the field. Flesh hounds howled and tore at the ground, trying to burrow away from the pressure. Greater things in the red sky turned their horned heads toward the palace and bellowed with sudden fear. The hosts of Khorne did not understand mercy, but they understood threat. Something behind the walls of mankind's dying throne had stirred, and the warp recoiled from the possibility of a light that did not merely hold it back, but remembered how to command it to burn. The blade slid. Farther. A finger's width of metal showed. No light reflected from it. Light bent away. The exposed edge was not silver, not black, not any color made for mortal sight. It was an absence sharpened to purpose. It made the air bleed. It made the machines shriek. It made the wounds in CYPHER's body reopen, blood flowing down his armor and robe in dark sheets. His hands shook harder. Barakiel saw the blade and began to pray, not to the Emperor, not to the Lion, but to the silence between them. Valkus forced himself upright, one movement at a time, spear trembling in his grip. Do not. CYPHER heard him. He did not obey him. The sword came another fraction from the scabbard. Then the Emperor touched him. CYPHER had endured the warp tearing him across centuries. He had endured Caliban dying. He had endured brotherhood becoming a hunt, truth becoming poison, and memory becoming a blade he could never sheath. None of it prepared him for the will that closed around him now. It did not strike. It did not plead. It did not refuse. It commanded. Wait. The word did not sound. It became the shape of all things. It filled bone, blood, armor, memory, and oath. It was not mercy. It was not forgiveness. It was not denial. Within that command lay a vision of mankind not ready for the price of awakening. Worlds falling because the beacon changed. Fleets lost because the light shifted. Civil wars igniting as the corpse god became something the ecclesiarchy could not name. Guilliman forced to choose between truth and survival. The unforgiven shattered by revelations older than their shame. Terror itself, cracking beneath the convulsion of a god, no longer content to be a corpse. CYPHER saw the price. He had thought he understood cost. He had not. The Emperor's will held him before the final motion. Not as a jailer holds a prisoner. As a dying general holds a blade until the battlefield aligns. Wait. CYPHER's fingers tightened around the hilt. Blood ran from his nose, his mouth, the corners of his eyes. His heart hammered against his ribs. The sword wanted to move. The oath wanted completion. 10,000 years of ash demanded meaning. Caliban demanded witness. The dead demanded the truth be more than another corpse under another wall. Slowly, impossibly, CYPHER pushed the blade back. The exposed edge vanished into the scabbard. The second son died unborn. Across Terra, the demons howled in rage and relief. The palace systems convulsed and steadied. The golden pressure remained, vast and wounded and silent. Barakiel collapsed fully, weeping blood through clenched teeth. Valkus lowered his spear by a fraction, not in trust, not in mercy, but because he too had felt the command, and obedience to that source was older than every suspicion. CYPHER released the hilt. His hand remained trembling in the air for a heartbeat before falling to his side. He did not know whether he had failed. He did not know whether he had obeyed. He did not know whether the first stage of the oath had just been completed in the language of restraint rather than steel. Beyond the sealed doors, the Emperor burned on in golden agony. CYPHER bowed his hooded head, not in worship and not in surrender, in waiting. CYPHER left the Emperor's shadow as a man leaves a battlefield he has not won. He did not flee with triumph. He did not stride from the sealed antechamber as a conqueror, nor as a martyr spared for later glory. He moved like something cut loose from an execution half completed, one hand pressed to the wound in his side, the other hanging near the pistols he had not used when using them would have been easier. Blood ran beneath his robe in warm sheets, soaking through the torn white cloth until it clung black and heavy against ancient armor. His helm display was dead. His left knee servo snarled with every third step. His hearts beat out of rhythm, each pulse a hammer blow against ribs cracked by auramite and fate. Behind him, the last ward sealed itself. It did not close cleanly. It spasmed, stuttered, and ground shut with a sound like a tomb lid dragging over bones. Gold circuitry flickered along the black gate and died in patches, leaving scars of burned metal where the ancient command code had passed through its spirit. Warding cherubs hung motionless in the air, their anti-grav motors whining, blood leaking from their nose slits and sealed eyes. One by one they dropped, striking the marble floor, with wet little cracks. Barakiel lay on his knees beneath the dead light, one hand clawed against the floor, the broken head of his Crozius beside him. His skull helm had split further during the psychic storm. Through the ruin, one eye glared raw and red, rimmed by blood and hate. The other lens burned dark. He tried to rise when CYPHER passed him. He failed. "Coward," the interrogator chaplain rasped. CYPHER paused. Valkus still stood between them, though standing was an act of will rather than ease. The shield captain's guardian spear remained in his grasp. Its blade hummed unevenly, power field damaged, edge marked by the impossible pressure that had filled the antechamber. His auramite plate bore scorches from plasma, cracks from the collapse of warding force, and blood streaks where his own flesh had answered the Emperor's presence with rupture. Yet his stance held. A lesser warrior would have knelt. A lesser demigod would have raged. Valkus merely watched. Barakiel dragged himself another handspan across the floor. "You came to murder him." CYPHER looked down at the chaplain. "No. You reached for the blade." "Yes. You would have damned every world that still breathes his light." CYPHER's voice was worn, almost hollow. "Every world that breathes his light is already paying for it in souls." Barakiel spat blood. "Heretic." The word had no strength left in it, only habit. CYPHER turned away. Valkus raised the spear by a fraction, enough to bar the corridor, not enough to strike. "The palace will not permit you to leave. The palace has misplaced me before. This is not the dark cells." "No," CYPHER said. "This is closer to the truth. That makes it easier to lie to." For the first time, Valkus hesitated. It lasted less than a mortal heartbeat. It was still real. The custodian had felt the command. He had felt the impossible will that stopped the blade. He had felt, buried beneath all duty, the terrible suggestion that the prisoner before him had not been rejected by the master of mankind. Delayed, perhaps. Denied, perhaps. Preserved, perhaps. There were no safe words for it. Valkus lowered the spear just enough. "Go no deeper." CYPHER's hood inclined. "I already went deep enough." He passed the shield captain and entered the procession route alone. The palace was dying and surviving in the same breath. Above him, Terror's war continued to thunder through stone. The demonic assault had not ended, but something had changed. The pressure that had rolled from the throne's outer presence, the unborn flare of the half-drawn blade, had struck the warp host like a hammer against diseased bone. The hosts of Khorne still killed. They still roared, hacked, butchered and drowned trenches in arterial flood. But their frenzy had cracked. Their certainty had bled. Mortal defenders felt it without understanding. They saw demons recoil from empty air. They saw flesh hounds turn on one another. They saw bloodletters scream in rage at something inside the palace walls, something they feared more than shells, flame, or golden spears. The custodes pressed the advantage with silent perfection. Mortal armies died to buy each pace. The approachways to the Lion's Gate became meat fields. Tank tracks churned demonic ichor together with human remains until the ground became a black-red paste that sucked at boots and treads. Burned-out baneblades sat like gutted fortresses amid fields of corpses, their crews cooked inside, their command cupolas welded shut by hellfire. Pilgrims who had fled into trench lines were trampled beneath counter-attacking armor. Men prayed while loading artillery. Men prayed while killing their friends, who had begun to speak with voices not their own. Men prayed while holding in their intestines with both hands, waiting for Medici who would never come, because the Medici were already dead beneath the hooves of brass beasts. Voidcraft fell from the red heavens. One frigate, its spine broken by empiric backlash, descended in pieces above the outer palace districts. Its reactor died badly. The explosion turned clouds to fire and scattered burning hull fragments across a continent of roofs, shrine markets, hab towers and mustering yards. Tens of thousands vanished beneath the first impact. Hundreds of thousands more died in the storms that followed, burned, crushed, or asphyxiated beneath falling dust and sanctified ash. Still the bells rang. Still the preachers shouted that the emperor protected. Still the survivors crawled from the ruins and kissed the blood-wet stones, because belief was all that remained when shelter, food, command, and sky had been taken. CYPHER moved through the underways beneath it. He left a trail no official record would ever admit existed. A dead fallen lay in a reliquary tunnel, his helm split open, skull emptied by a sniper round whose report had never reached him. Another had died in the Cathedral of Shattered Saints, torn by demon blades, while dark angels' storm bolters hammered overhead. Haroth was gone entirely, crushed and ripped apart by demonic strength, laughing at flames he mistook for Caliban. The broken wards of the dark cells still smouldered. The final gate bore the scar of a command code no fallen should have known. Servo skulls had seen. Pict recorders had seen. Machine spirits had seen. By dawn, they would remember nothing, or they would remember and be killed for it. CYPHER descended through a corpse-choked pilgrim passage where men had died standing because there had been no room to fall. Their bodies packed the corridor from wall to wall, mouths open, eyes burst, fingers locked in the robes and throats of those ahead of them. He forced his way through slowly, bones cracking beneath his boots, hands sliding from his armor as if the dead still begged him to take them with him. Once, a corpse moved, not alive. Something small and red crawled inside the chest cavity, wearing the dead man's ribs like a cage. CYPHER put a bolt round through the body and walked through the spray of rotten flesh without slowing. At a maintenance hatch beneath the western ordnance galleries, a man in black waited for him. Not a dark angel, not custodian, not mortal soldier. The Calexis assassin stood in the smoke with its animus speculum closed, body thin and still, aura gnawing at the soul of the corridor. Around it, the shadows seemed less like darkness and more like absence. CYPHER felt his strength gutter. The wound in his side became distant. His thoughts dulled at the edges. The Emperor's pressure had been agony, vast and golden and alive. This was the opposite, a spiritual void where meaning went to die. CYPHER raised his plasma pistol. The Calexis tilted its head. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the palace shook as a demon engine struck the galleries above. The ceiling split. A rain of molten stone, broken ammunition hoists, and screaming crewmen crashed between them. CYPHER fired once into the collapsing passage, not at the assassin, at the load-bearing spine above it. The underway came down, He was already through the hatch when the world behind him became dust, stone, and crushing darkness. Whether the Colexus died, evaded, or simply ceased to be where destruction arrived, he did not know. He did not need to know. The palace would keep sending hunters until the galaxy ended, or the truth did. Barachiel survived. This, too, was a kind of curse. When the fighting ebbed enough for extraction teams to reach the procession route, they found him seated against a shattered wall, one gauntlet closed around the broken Crozius, helm removed, face grey from blood loss and psychic trauma. Deathwing apothecaries came for him under sealed command. He refused sedation until he had spoken to the inner circle through a ciphered channel buried beneath 3 layers of false liturgy. His report was a lie shaped like duty. CYPHER attempted assassination of the master of mankind, Barachiel said, each word dragged through torn lungs. He breached multiple palace wards, but was intercepted before reaching his goal. The blade remained undrawn. He was driven away by loyal action before he could complete his treachery. The robed masters, listening from the rock, did not ask if this was true. They asked if anyone else knew. That was the difference between penitence and secrecy. Barachiel closed his eyes. The custodes know fragments. The Lord Commander may suspect more. Witnesses among mortal ranks are being removed from relevance. Records must be hunted. Every brother who heard the fallen speak must be sealed by oath or silence. And CYPHER? Barachiel's eye opened. Hunt him. There was a pause across the void, weighted by 10,000 years. Under what charge? Barachiel looked down at his broken Crozius, at the blood dried in the winged cracks of its head. All of them. Valkus survived as well. He stood before the Captain General's appointed auditors in a chamber of cold gold and clear air, his armor repaired only enough for ceremony, not enough to conceal damage from those trained to read it. He gave his report without embellishment, without apology, and without fear. The prisoner escaped confinement during the Noctis Eterna disruption. The prisoner breached non-critical ward layers. The prisoner was intercepted before entering any sanctum of absolute threshold. The Emperor was never endangered. The auditors listened. Servitors scratched the report into sealed memory. A silent custodian beside the door watched Valkus with an expression no helm revealed. "Your assessment of the prisoner's objective?" asked one auditor. Valkus did not answer immediately. He thought of the blade beginning to leave the scabbard. He thought of demons screaming across terror. He thought of the command that had filled his bones with meaning older than language. "Wait." "Unknown," Valkus said. "Was he servant of the archenemy?" "No." The answer came too quickly for comfort. The auditor's quill paused. Valkus corrected nothing. Was he loyal? No. Then what was he? Valkus looked toward the sealed wall, toward the buried direction of the throne. A risk postponed. The report was accepted. Parts were sealed. Parts were erased. Parts were rewritten into forms safer for those who needed certainty more than truth. Guilliman read neither report in full. He was allowed summaries, which told him more by absence than inclusion. Barachiel's account stank of obsession disciplined into doctrine. Valkus's account was too clean, too narrow, too precise in the way of a warrior refusing to lie except by omission. Guilliman stood in a war chamber beneath maps of the bleeding galaxy and understood that CYPHER's mission had touched something even the Lord Commander of the Imperium could not safely expose. That was the horror of power in the age he had inherited. There were truths he could not speak, because truth would kill worlds faster than ignorance. There were lies he had to wield, because men required them to keep firing into the dark. He, who had once believed in administration, law, rational empire, and enlightened conquest, now commanded armies under the banners of a god he did not believe his father had wished to become. He looked toward the distant inner palace, where the Emperor sat in silence. "What did you tell him?" Gilliman asked no one. No answer came. Only the war. Terror survived. Survival was not victory, no matter how many priests declared it so. Districts drowned in blood. Pilgrim continents burned. Entire devotional cities became charred geometry beneath ashfall and wreckage. Orbital debris rained for days, hammering shrine roofs, splitting hab towers, igniting ammunition reserves, and crushing refugee masses into paste beneath sacred rubble. Billions were left praying over ash because there were no bodies intact enough to mourn. The dead were rendered into smoke, names, ration loss, tactical necessity, and sermon material. The living kissed the ground and thanked the emperor for sparing them from the death given to the man beside them. The demonic assault was broken. The cost was obscene. The Imperium called it deliverance. The Dark Angels called it opportunity. From the rock, orders spread through channels within channels. Ravenwing hunts doubled across the Segmentum Solar and beyond. Deathwing teleportariums were sanctified for immediate pursuit. Interrogator chaplains received sealed addenda to ancient charges. CYPHER was no longer merely the greatest of the fallen, no longer merely the untaken confession, the blade that would not be drawn, the stain that walked between their lies. He had reached terror. He had stood too close to the throne. He had spoken words that made even the custodes alter their silence. They did not know his purpose. That made him worse. If he had meant assassination, he was a traitor to be slain. If he had meant redemption, he was a blasphemy against all their rituals of repentance. If he had meant awakening, he had stepped into a realm of forbidden possibility where the Dark Angel's shame was only one thread in a tapestry of horrors. If he had meant to force the Emperor's soul free of the throne, then the Unforgiven had not been hunting a fugitive. They had been hunting a key. Across hidden chambers, surviving enemies argued in the language of their orders. Assassinorum handlers marked him as unresolved threat. Custodian analysts marked him as anomalous actor of non-chaotic allegiance. Inquisitorial fragments named him arch-heretic, possible saint, Alpha Legion deception, demonic lure, temporal contaminant, fallen commander, or weaponized myth. Dark angels named him CYPHER, and within that name placed every fear they could not confess. Far from terror, on a dead moon without atmosphere, he watched the throne world turn beneath a veil of ash. The moon had no name worth remembering. Its surface was grey dust, black stone, and the remains of an Auspex shrine abandoned before the rift tore the galaxy open. Broken antennae clawed at the void. A statue of the Emperor lay toppled near the crater's edge, its face shattered by micrometeor strikes, one hand still raised as if blessing a horizon that had never existed. CYPHER stood beside it. His robe had been replaced by another, though this one was already stained by blood and travel. His armor was scarred. His wounds were sealed, but not healed. The pistols rested at his sides. The sword lay across his back in its scabbard, silent since the palace. Until now, it whispered, not in words, not with a voice. The sound came through the bones of him, through the old oath, through the scar in his palm and the memory of Caliban's burning. It was a pressure like the moment before a blade leaves leather, a question without mercy. CYPHER did not turn. Behind him, something waited among the broken shrine pylons. It may have been a man. It may have been memory. It may have been one more ghost from the forest that had never stopped remembering. It did not breathe loudly enough for mortal ears. It did not step into view. CYPHER looked upon distant terror. Even from the dead moon, even through void and ash and war, he could feel the golden wound burning. The Emperor does not need saving from death, he said. He needs saving from us. Beneath the imperial palace, far below the avenues where pilgrims crawled over cooling blood and priests shouted victory over the dead, a forgotten machine spirit stirred inside a damaged diagnostic shrine. It had lost most of its higher functions during the Noctis Eterna. Its memory stacks were cracked. Its sensorium was half-blind. Its devotional subroutines had overwritten fragments of its original purpose, and 3 separate departments had declared it obsolete in 3 separate centuries, without ever assigning a servitor to remove it. Still, it recorded. It compared output. It measured psychic load. It tasted fluctuations in the system's slave to the Golden Throne. It passed noise from anomaly, with the patience of a thing that did not know it had been forgotten. A single impossible datum remained. For less than a heartbeat, during the moment no official record would ever admit had occurred, the Golden Throne's output had risen, not surged, not malfunctioned, risen. The old machine spirit processed the anomaly again and again, seeking a permissible explanation. It found none. Its cracked logic core warmed. Its prayer subroutines failed. Its Auspex memory replayed the data one final time, and in the dead language of machines, it reached the only conclusion its ruined mind could bear. For one instant, the corpse upon the throne had taken a breath.